with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It's Thursday, April 4th, 2019. My name is Michael Brooks on a Michael Thursday, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, legendary journalist Mike Hanna, former CNN Jerusalem bureau chief, Al Jazeera correspondent, currently independent presenter and journalist on the Trump-Saudi nuclear deal. Plus, the ongoing fallout of pulling out of the Iran deal, and Twitter diplomacy affirming the Israeli occupation of the Golan Heights. All of that with Mike Hanna on today's program. Turns out some members of the Mueller team think that Bob Barr's 4-page summary is not doing justice to the full range of the Mueller report. Jared Kushner is identified as the White House official whose security clearance has been denied. House Democrats use an arcane 1920s law to demand Trump's tax returns. They finally did it. Mitch McConnell triggers the nuclear option to speed through more of Trump's nominees. Incredibly disturbing, horrifying report in Harper's that the United States is tracking migrant women's periods to stop them from getting abortions. Okay. I don't even... Jesus Christ. DOJ report finds widespread rape, murder, and torture in Alabama prisons. Venezuelan deputy minister says more Russian troops are deploying to Venezuela. And Jair Bolsonaro, at a visit to a Holocaust museum of Benjamin Netanyahu, affirms that the Nazis were leftists in the ongoing fascist alliance emanating from Brazil to Israel. A prominent indigenous rights leader in Brazil has been murdered, and we are approaching the 1-year anniversary of the political imprisonment of the man who would have defeated Bolsonaro, Lula da Silva. All that and much, much more on today's Majority Report. We are here, 3-man crew. It's cool. Jamie's lucky with the Ford. She can surface around. I've seen her set her schedule and pick different days at different times, and you're like, wow, just even
Saturdays for? Sean. Saturdays are for the boys.
Thursdays are for the boys.
That's every time Jamie says, can I come in on a Thursday? That's what Matt just puts this up on screen, and it's like, no.
Although I take my, I don't have as many 4-day weeks as some of you, but I like to take mine right in the middle of the week. Break it up.
Oh yeah, I would love to have that one of those. You got it nice with that Wednesday off. Brendan and I have to be here 5 days. See, Brendan works the most of any of us, objectively. I actually...
we love it. We love working.
We love working. But I'm here 5 days a week. Solo hosting 1 day a week, or main hosting 1 day a week. And then Seder, Mr. 4-day work week guy, has to be like, oh, you missed days. Oh, Thursday, that's my mental health day. Ridiculous. All right. Oh, wait, we're doing this instead? Okay. Social democracy and basic progressive politics is making the right and the mouthpieces of oligarchs in this country lose their minds so much that one is tempted to embrace full communism just to see what the psychological fallout for these people would be if we did that. This is Maria Bartiromo and Stuart Varney, having a hissy fit about the idea. Essentially, if we were to create an image, tax policies on oligarchs who have money levels. First of all, billionaires should not exist. Billionaires are fundamentally incompatible with democracy, full stop, including a market democracy, by the way. But any democracy where you took seriously the idea that a broad base of people should be making decisions about their lives, no one could be a billionaire, period. And so we're not even talking about getting rid of billionaires. We're just talking about higher tax rates on capital gains. Essentially, in the image that I always think of, I mean, it literally is just like Mr. Burns taking the lollipop out of the Simpson baby's stroller, right? Like, you're basically just saying, instead of giving people who already have way too much, both economically, politically, and also obviously morally, and just freeing this money up so that people can like feed themselves and have heating. This is actually very basic stuff. Listen to how Maria Bartiromo and Stuart Varney talk about this.
Welcome back. Democrats are proposing another tax, this time on capital gains. Joining us now, the host of Varney & Company, Stuart Varney, to weigh in. Good morning, Stu. These taxes are piling up.
Is there any aspect of our financial lives that the government doesn't want to have a piece of? Answer, no. Ron Wyden, Democrats, Senator, Oregon, he proposes that a capital gains tax be levied every year and the tax rate be the same rate as ordinary income. So, if I were to sell my Microsoft, and as I've accumulated my Microsoft over the years, according to this scheme, I would have had to pay a capital gains tax every year, even though I never realized the gain by selling Microsoft. You know, I would have to look at how much money I'd made at the end of the year and pay a capital gains tax on that at the same rate as my ordinary income. I mean, dear Lord. Is there any aspect of our lives that they don't want a big piece of? The answer is no. They want it all. That's what they want. We used to have a differential rate between work and money. They propose to make it all the same. Yeah. Terrible.
Well, at least they're telling us all their plans before 2020.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of people will like those plans. That's my problem here.
All right. Stu,
Stuart, real quick, this is wealth confiscation. Say it with me. It's wealth confiscation, and it's communist.
Yes.
That's exactly what it is.
It's at least a socialist.
For sure. I know you'll have more in 10 minutes, Stu. We'll see you then. Varney Company begins top of the hour, 9 a.m. Eastern.
Yeah, it's confiscation. That's good. We support that. But I will say, we all remember, even those of us who didn't study the Soviet Union that closely, but I think, if you even just took a few courses, you were very aware of the Stalin's capital gains plan, which was not only central to the Soviet project, that actually set off his second purge, actually. Second Great Purge was Stalin was very angry that members of the Central Committee, Commentariat, they wanted to keep it at a 70% rate, and he was pushing for a 90% rate. Of course, during the Cultural Revolution, we saw the highest capital gains ever when Mao put it to 95%. It was significantly reversed, obviously, under Deng Xiaoping.
I'm not an expert on capital gains taxes, but the way he says they're trying to make money and work taxed at the same rate, like money should be taxed at a higher rate.
Right, that is an incredible line, right? You're like, right, exactly. I mean, but it is just incredible. I mean, it's not even necessarily socialist. I mean, not to get too pedantic here, but this is just like super basic progressive taxation. And so, like, the projection of radicalism is, as always, just projection, right? I mean, but it's funny to watch them lose their minds over it. And let's give them a lot more to lose their minds about by electing Bernie Sanders president. The Majority Report is supported in part by Simple Habit. Simple Habit is a mobile app that provides a massive and diverse library. Sorry. What was that?
That's just a 21 Savage instrumental.
I
didn't mean to.
On TMBS, where we don't do ads, I would absolutely read a guided meditation ad over a 21 Savage instrumental. But I think on MR, I don't know, you want to put some Cat Stevens under it or something?
I think the copyright police
some Ravi Shankar.
We shouldn't do anything about that.
Okay, all right, let me reset this. The Majority Report is supported in part by Simple Habit. Simple Habit is a mobile app that provides massive and diverse library of 5-minute guided meditations. And the Majority Report audience can try Simple Habit totally free for an entire week when you go to simplehabit.com/majority. There is a growing body of evidence going, I think, back at least to the 80s with Herbert Benson at Harvard University, who documented something called the relaxation response, down to Richie Davidson at the University of Wisconsin with his research on MRIs and meditation. Meditation has been reported to increase relaxation, decrease depression. It's good for sleep. It also might help you with pain management as well. There's a plethora of studies about it. Simple Habit has over 2,000 guided meditations specifically designed for different parts of your day and just about anything you might be dealing with in life. They have guided meditations for mindfulness, meditations for anxiety, for depression, when you're having trouble falling asleep, meditation for when you're wanting to overcome procrastination or when you're having something important going on at work, and meditations designed for parents. They have meditations made specifically for when you're waking up or on your lunch break or when you've just gotten home from work or when you're going to bed. People know that, I not daily, but I have a meditation practice I do. And, it's enormously helpful. I don't want to there isn't really much else to say. It absolutely helps you manage, particularly a very stressful and overwhelming life, a lot better and perceive things better. Different people are trying to accomplish different things in meditation, and with Simple Habit, it's able to cater to just about anyone, regardless of their goals, regardless of what their goals are with meditation, how much past experience they have with meditation. So as I said, I've had long-term experience in meditation, but I've been using the app to help fall asleep. It's incredibly helpful. I have trouble falling asleep, and it's an excellent way to just slow down and help make that happen. There are a variety of guided meditations on Simple Habit, and that's what sets it apart. Simple Habit just won the 2018 Google Play Award for Best Wellbeing App, and it's available on iOS, Android, and web browser. And the Majority Report audience can try it for free by going for a week. Can try it for free for a week by going to simplehabit.com/majority. If you're watching on YouTube, we'll put a link in the video description. We're going to take a brief break, and we're going to be right back with Mike Hanna on the Majority Report. Welcome back to the Majority Report. Michael Brooks here. Joining us now is Mike Hanna. He's a contributing presenter and reporter for Al Jazeera and is currently present at the United Nations. Mike, thanks so much for being with us.
Nice to be with you, Michael.
There's a little bit of static. You got that? Okay. Mike, there's been a report recently that you actually did. You did a package for Al Jazeera last week that we'll direct people to as well on this congressional report on the Trump administration's efforts to sell nuclear technology to Saudi Arabia. This hasn't gotten much attention, but it's something that could have significant implications for the political dynamics of the Middle East and security there. What is that story? How is this deal sort of coming into place, and what are the players? Who are the players?
Well, most observers believe there's just been so much corruption within the Trump administration that something like this has flown right under the radar, as you say, and yet it is exceedingly significant. What is exactly going on is that the Energy Department has granted licenses under what is called Part 810, 7 licenses to U.S. companies to provide nuclear technology and information to Saudi Arabia. Now, what is weird about this is that this is not the beginning of a process. This process began months, indeed years ago, and it's been part of an ongoing lobbying process by people allied with President Trump and his administration who have launched a campaign to lobby this administration to provide these licenses for businesses. Now, a couple of names involved with this. Michael Flynn, you might remember, a former national security advisor indicted by the special counsel. Tom Barrack, very close friend of Donald Trump, also involved with his campaign. Now, what lies behind this all are a number of U.S. nuclear companies. One of them is called IP3 International, who Michael Flynn worked for as a paid consultant and paid lobbyist with relation to Saudi Arabia before he became National Security Advisor, while he was National Security Advisor, and after he was fired as National Security Advisor. Now, that's not an end to it. Just a few weeks ago, President Trump at the White House held a meeting with nuclear technology companies, U.S., and among them, there we are. We have got IP3 International. So these 7 licenses that have been granted at this particular place in what Congress insists is an intention to circumvent its authority is just perhaps the beginning of what is a massive deal between certain U.S. companies and Saudi Arabia in terms of developing Saudi nuclear technology against the clear and expressed wishes of Congress.
And what relate? And so, okay, so it's against the expressed wishes of Congress. Do we have a sense? I guess first of all, what about the obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty and other agreements on controlling this technology are implicated by this deal making?
Well, let's just take a look at it from the Saudi side. Now, Saudi Arabia, many years ago, signed an SQP. This is a small quantities protocol. Now, that says that basically the country does not have significant amounts of nuclear material. Now, that was a long time ago. That particular protocol has been updated. Saudi Arabia has refused to sign the update of that, has refused to sign any deal with the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, for inspection of its developing nuclear technology. Now, this is one of the points that members of Congress have brought up, is that Saudi Arabia is not being certified to be capable of dealing with nuclear technology in terms of international conventions. And very pointedly, one of the representatives said to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, while in questioning him in a House committee meeting, if you cannot trust a regime with a buzzsaw, then how can you trust it with nuclear technology? This in reference to the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. So both Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Secretary of Energy Rick Perry, who's actually signed off on these 7 agreements, have refused to answer these questions from Congress, repeated questions, the last coming just 2 days ago in a bipartisan letter from a Senate committee asking Rick Perry to explain exactly what lay behind the decision to grant these licenses and why was Congress not consulted.
So why? I mean, is the question. There's obviously the Trump administration, endless allegations and stories of corruption implicating a whole bunch of people. There's the self-interest of companies here in the United States. There's the strategy of Saudi Arabia. And I guess that's in some ways the most, I mean, it's all very disturbing, but is this we're planning for a post, fossil fuel world, even in our own kind of small way, and we want to look towards this technology? Or is it based on the sort of much more aggressive moves in Saudi foreign policy we've seen the past several years, particularly amplified by this very aggressive leadership of Mohammed bin Salman, a deep paranoia about Iran? Is this a desire for a weapon?
Well, a simple answer to that is a mixture of all of that, Michael. Saudi Arabia is on the record, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is on the record as saying last year that should Iran advance its nuclear capabilities, then Saudi Arabia will obtain nuclear power. He has specifically said that Saudi Arabia wants nuclear ability. Now, we are talking 2 levels here. One is nuclear power for peaceful purposes. The other is advanced nuclear technology for weaponized nuclear programs. Now, what lies behind this as well is getting back to the big picture. Which was the first country that President Trump visited as president? It was Saudi Arabia. Which country has President Trump continued to defend, even though his own intelligence agencies say it was responsible for the murder and dismemberment of a journalist, even though his intelligence agencies say it is carrying out a vicious, unchecked war in Yemen, right, even though Congress says it was responsible for the murder of the Saudi journalist and for massive abuse of human rights, even though Congress says it is responsible for an outrageous, cruel, and vicious war in Yemen. Yet President Trump chose them as close allies. President Trump continues to protect them, both from Congress and from the reports of his own intelligence agencies. So that is simply a question that I pass out. Why? Secondly, there is an issue here of why were these particular agreements agreed to by the Secretary of Energy? On the face of it, a simple way to circumvent Congress. Now, in terms of Congress's control over U.S. nuclear relations with outside countries, there is a 1-2-3 agreement. Now, this is a protocol by which any business done on a nuclear basis by U.S. companies with foreign entities has to go through Congress. Congress will look at the nature of the deal, will see what safeguards is built into it, and will then issue a 1-2-3 agreement, which will allow U.S. companies and the U.S. government itself to exchange nuclear information and nuclear technology. Now, that does require a clear legislative procedure. What has happened now with these small-term, pump-term agreements is very clearly a bid to circumvent Congress. Congress is well aware of this. It's an issue that Congress is dealing with on a bipartisan level. This incredibly divided Congress comes together on this particular issue with relation to nuclear technology and Saudi Arabia. And of course, as we've just seen on this very day, a criticism of Saudi's ongoing war in Yemen and a congressional demand passed by both House and Senate that the U.S. withdraw its support for Saudi Arabia in that operation, which is, all expect, going to lead to the second veto of President Trump's administration. He's going to veto it and send it back to Congress.
And just to spell that out, the United States, along with the United Kingdom, is refueling Saudi jets, supporting logistically, and even in the vote in Congress on pulling the U.S. backing for this war in Yemen, which maybe if you want to, you could get into a little bit more detail into just in terms of just how much of it, frankly, this is just a horrific mass murder of Yemenis and interference in internal politics, leading to mass death and devastation. But that in fact, even a bill that has actually potentially already been a bit compromised potentially because of something attached in there on intelligence sharing, which needs to be sort of part of pulling out support as well. The Trump administration still would even veto a slightly softened version because they are so committed to being aligned with Saudi Arabia across the board, whether it's the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, mass murder in Yemen, and also just the sort of generally initially the blockade of Qatar and the kind of broader, profoundly reckless steps of the current Saudi leadership.
Yes, I mean, it's very interesting in one level, Michael, that I've spoken to some people connected to the Department of Defense. There has been huge disquiet within the DoD in relation to the U.S. support for Saudi Arabia in that war in Yemen. And very quietly, in fact, the DoD instructed U.S. forces to stop airborne refueling of Saudi fighter aircraft, for example. That no longer happens. The U.S. remains in there as what is described as a consultative service. Department of Defense officials say that the reason for the U.S. being there is to improve Saudi Arabia's targeting, to minimize civilian loss in that ongoing action. Now, that's the official DoD position. But there are many within the DoD, and certainly many in the field, who are exceedingly concerned about the level of risk that the U.S. is putting on itself, supporting an operation that is claiming so many civilian casualties over a long period of time. Now, that is something that Congress has been looking at even before the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. There was great concern in Congress on both sides of the aisle about the ramifications of U.S. support in a war that is claiming mass civilian casualties. Then the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, which concentrated even further the minds of members of Congress, and you had even rabid supporters of President Trump, such as Senator Lindsey Graham, coming out in support of this bill, coming out in opposition to providing support for Saudi Arabia, and in Graham's case, insisting that the murder of Jamal Khashoggi proved once and for all that Saudi Arabia at every level, not just in terms of supporting it in the war, was not a fit partner for the U.S. in any form. So the level of anger in Congress is intense. The pushback from the Trump administration is massive. As I said, we are going to see in coming days another veto coming out of the Trump administration, another insistence that the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia is more important than acknowledging civilian deaths in Yemen, than acknowledging the murder of a journalist for whom fingers have been pointed at the highest levels in the Saudi government, including the Crown Prince himself. So the question being asked in Congress is, at what stage does the Trump administration stop what would appear to be absolute blind support for this current Saudi regime? And the other question simply is, why does this support continue with this intensity?
Then, of course, this, the stunning juxtaposition of this with the fact that the Trump administration coming into office and pulling out of the Iran deal, which had been steadily confirmed by all objective international agencies, even the United States State Department. There was the side recertification, which the Congress passed, but was not actually part of the Iran deal, but it required essentially the administration in charge to continue to sign off on it once every several months. Well, Rex Tillerson actually did sign off on it in the beginning of the Trump administration because there was simply no evidence from any legitimate body that Iran was in any way deviating from the agreement. They were fulfilling it entirely. Now, there's a whole other set of disagreements and problems with Iran, including different geostrategy in Lebanon or Syria, and of course, absolutely legitimate objections to very serious abuses by the Iranian government of their own people. Obviously, from an administration that supports Saudi Arabia to the hilt, that's, ludicrous on its face, but nonetheless an entirely valid point when aimed at the Iranian leadership. But how does this juxtaposition of this incredibly reckless move, dangerous move, to pull out of the Iran deal, first of all, with this sort of push towards, giving Saudi Arabia this capacity, and then secondly, how the rest of the world has been responding, because the Europeans, certainly China, Russia, India, South Africa, they've all been trying to keep this deal in place, which is another sort of major fallout in the Middle East from the Trump era policy.
Yes, well, once again, to look at the broad picture of this, Iran, as you said, may be guilty of certain violations, but one thing that you can be specific about, that according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, according to its inspectors, according to the European Union, according to most Western powers, Iran has stood by the terms of that nuclear deal, in terms of which it opened up its nuclear activities to international inspection in return for an ending of sanctions against Iran. Now, that was basically brushed away by President Trump by refusing to continue to certify the agreement. Now, you did mention that Tillerson acknowledged that there had been verification, that Iran had stuck to its end of the deal. In fact, so did President Trump. Twice at the beginning of his administration, signed off on an ongoing 6-month extension of recognizing that deal. It was the third time that he was supposed to sign that President Trump basically threw the deal off the table in complete contravention of international law on which this deal is based, which specifically forbids any unilateral pullout from the deal by any individual party. So that is an ongoing argument. That's an ongoing discussion. In the absence of the United States, the other partners to that deal have continued to explore ways in which to circumvent sanctions to allow Iran to benefit from that deal, which was the whole point in the first place when President Obama was one of the signatories to the deal. But the issue is that the whole relationship with Saudi Arabia is couched in terms by the Trump administration of opposition to Iran. You had Rex Tillerson, as you correctly say, express his own concerns about moving away from the Iran deal, about throwing in all support for Saudi Arabia. Well, he went. He was replaced with Mike Pompeo, very much anti-Iran, very much a supporter of pushing them out into the cold. You have now as National Security Advisor John Bolton, who has made a career out of bashing Iran and out of finding ways in which to undercut that particular administration. Now, all of this has come together, and in the end, the Trump administration is using Iran as the bogeyman to justify its ongoing support for Saudi Arabia, implying that if they did not support Saudi Arabia in their opposition to Iran, then Iran would spread its influence within the Middle East. So all of these things come together in terms of ongoing support for Saudi Arabia, but many observers believe that behind that support lies not necessarily national principle or U.S. interests. It may very well be just simple, naked greed in terms of turning profit out of Saudi Arabia oil or turning profit out of the sale of nuclear technology by people who have close connections to the Trump administration, including, one must point out, his close advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who has been at the entire center without any office whatsoever, apart from that given to him by his father-in-law, of ongoing relations with Saudi Arabia and in directing U.S. policy in the whole Middle East region.
In the last couple of minutes, though, I have two. I'll start small and then go larger, because also this fits into, an alliance, obviously, with Israel. Now, of course, the United States has always, throughout every administration, favored Israel. That's an objective comment. But there's also been still, at the very least, discourse, and in the second half of the second term of the Obama administration, a little bit of actual expression of annoyance about the fact that Israel continues to maintain the occupation and that there isn't any steps from Israeli leadership on the so-called two-state solution. Now, obviously, the Trump administration has gone to a whole other degree and basically formalized with Netanyahu an extreme far-right axis between the United States and Israel, and also built on a lot of shared commonalities of, anti-Muslim extremism and xenophobia and so on. How does the formalization over Twitter of the occupation of the Golan Heights fit into this? And by the way, could you also explain what the Golan Heights are?
Yes, well, the Golan Heights are part of land that were conquered or occupied by Israel during a war against the Lebanese. Israel subsequently annexed that particular strip of land, something that is not recognized in international law. International law very clearly declares that land taken by force cannot be legally annexed by any nation, that it is an abrogation of any other nation's sovereignty. Now, the U.S. or the Trump administration, in terms of recognizing Israel's illegal occupation of the Golan Heights and recognizing its claim to annexation, is completely reversing its position, for example, on Crimea. The United States, Trump appointed UN ambassador, has argued very strongly within the United Nations, where I now sit, that Russia's occupation of Crimea and subsequent annexation is illegal in terms of international law, pointing out the well-known international legal principle and UN resolution that territory taken by force cannot be subject to annexation. Yet when it comes to Israel and the Golan Heights, we've got a sudden reversal on that. So there's a complete inconsistency, in fact, laughable inconsistency with that particular opinion. Now, the timing of that particular move by the Trump administration, there is no real need for the Trump administration to recognize Israel's claims to sovereignty in the Golan Heights. Everything was going along fine as far as Israel was concerned, as far as the Lebanese were concerned, even perhaps quietly as far as the Syrians were concerned. Israel was in control there. Nobody but Israel acknowledged the sovereignty over it. But Trump, by actually recognizing that claim to sovereignty, has now thrown an entire new ball into the mix. Now, what would be the reason for that? There would appear to be only one reason, and that is to bolster Benjamin Netanyahu in the Israeli elections taking place this month. It was a very powerful bone to throw to Netanyahu, who's having his own problems within the Israel electorate concerning mass corruption within his administration and that of his family. But by President Trump offering this particular recognition is a massive boost to Benjamin Netanyahu in the Israeli elections, just as the U.S. recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital was a massive boost for Benjamin Netanyahu. So you have here a situation, and just to digress slightly, I was present at the IPAC conference, that is the Israeli lobbying group within the United States, and spoke to a number of people who were deeply disturbed about what they saw as unwarranted U.S. interference in the Israeli election process, seeing Donald Trump's massive and very public support for Benjamin Netanyahu as being interference in Israel's internal affairs. I've also heard at that particular conference a number of speakers saying that IPAC, that massive lobbying group, has always, publicly at least, prided itself on its bipartisan nature. It has gone out of its way to support neither Republican nor Democrat, but to lobby all equally. Many within IPAC feel that that is moving away with the Trump administration. That IPAC, through its association with those who it is lobbying, and through President Trump's action, is being seen increasingly as a partisan organization, there for the benefit of Republican administrations, which long-term would be exceedingly detrimental to the interests of IPAC within the United States. So there are many wheels within wheels here. And once again, the question is asked, why that unquestioning support of the Trump administration for Israel? As you point out, there isn't a U.S. administration that has not supported Israel. There's not a member of Congress that would publicly denounce that particular support. Although there is a shift in Congress with the shifting demographics that occurred after the midterms, where there are questions being asked among Democrats, for example, not about support for Israel, but about unquestioning support for Israel. That is what is now being questioned more than at any time in the past. But throughout this all, the Trump administration remains fixated on not only supporting Israel, but on doubling down on that particular support. So behind it, some might argue, lies Trump's grand Middle East peace plan, which, to get back to what you were talking about a few minutes ago, does involve Saudi Arabia as a fulcrum that people like Jared Kushner believe they can use to lever a Middle East peace, basically by sidelining the Palestinians and by getting countries like Saudi Arabia to use their influence to bring the rest of the Arab world on board with a deal that President Trump would say would secure a Middle East peace. Just on that particular object, any deal that involves handing Jerusalem over to Israel would produce massive revolutions within the Arab world, whether or not this current Saudi regime attempted to sign off on it or not.
As a final question then, what would it look like if we were to say, so there's this way in which, again, traditional U.S. policy favors essentially an axis between Saudi Arabia and Israel for a variety of reasons, and overlooks, of course, a variety of massive human costs generated by both the Israeli and Saudi Arabian governments. Trump has sort of put that on steroids and totally, attempted to reverse the Obama administration's very modest moves to try to sort of cool down and sort of slightly rebalance the Middle East, and then in fact actually pivot to Asia. That was the whole frame of it. And now you see inside the Democratic Party, I think it's both demographic, but I think also, as an example on the progressive side, someone like Bernie Sanders, even in 2016, I think through a combination of his own conviction, he had actually spoken on behalf of Palestinian rights going back to the 80s, but also just in sort of the current political realities that if you're the sort of emergent kind of left in Democratic circles is not going to be comfortable with the type of abuses that you see emanating out of Israel or, obviously Saudi Arabia, that there is a slightly ideological shift. So I guess, and this is a very big picture question, but if a Democrat was to retake the White House in 2020 and perhaps, a more imaginative or progressive one, what would what would it actually look like in terms of a shift in the beginning of an administration? And obviously I'm asking you as someone who knows this better than anybody else in my or as well as anybody else at the very least in my estimation. So not of course not just on the first day, invite Norman Finkelstein in for a teach-in or something. But, what would an actual shift look like to really recalibrate this across the board under new leadership?
Well, it would be virtually impossible to recalibrate it over any finite period of time. The amount of destruction that has already been wrought by the Trump administration is incalculable. But it is not only within the U.S. itself. One must remember that one of the only viable peace plans many observers believe that was out there on the table was the Saudi plan from 2001, which was essentially a land for peace deal, which the then Bush administration rejected completely, the Israelis rejected, but it's been lying around for a long period of time. Every now and then somebody picks it up and dusts it off and presents it as a viable option. Now, why I'm mentioning all of this is that by their ongoing negotiations that we do not know anything about, with figures like Jared Kushner, with President Trump's ambassador to Israel, both of whom met the Saudi leadership recently, Saudi Arabia itself seems to be going back on the plan that it itself devised all those years ago. So the damage that has been done is not only within the U.S. and in terms of U.S. action with regards to the Middle East, but also in terms of Saudi action within the Middle East. The movement from that Saudi plan at the beginning of the century to where Saudi appears to be sitting now is a massive turnaround. It's a 100-degree repositing. So to try and start this all from scratch, to try and recalibrate, as you put it, involves not only a change of leadership within the United States, but changes of leadership within all those parties who are involved in that ongoing struggle between Israelis and Palestinians. So the recalibration is far more than a domestic change within the United States. It is a regional and, in fact, global reboot in terms of the way this has been played for the last few years of the Trump administration. So it's a massive task, Michael, and why I say it is not something that can be achieved, possibly not within a finite period.
Well, Mike Hanna, if it is achieved, I definitely think your reporting and analysis will help make that happen, just in terms of the sort of direct and shrewd analysis of the issues. Mike Hanna, as always, I appreciate your time immensely, and talk with you soon. Thank you.
Many thanks, Michael. Lovely to talk to you as always.
Take care. And folks, I do recommend, you can watch Mike Hanna's Al Jazeera reports on YouTube, going back years now. I think he left CNN, in 2007. But yes, if you want to get up to speed on any of these things, even just in 2019, with what's happening at the UN, this Trump-Saudi deal, the Golan Heights, indispensable, well-produced, tight reporting there. Okay, we're going to go to the fun half. Become a member of the Majority Report today, and you can do it for less than a cup of coffee a day. $10 a month for a 5-day-a-week news, analysis, and comedy show. Fun half is, I think, frankly, it's been pretty funny recently.
Yeah, it's been okay.
You think we're falling off?
No, it has been very funny. I heard Brendan was doing some drops yesterday.
Brendan has a sense of the drop game. Brendan definitely.
I actually heard. I didn't watch the whole show yesterday, but I did tune in for a little bit, and I heard the "That's a fucking good point" drop.
It was there. Yeah, that's kind of my medium. I feel like better than me on mic is me behind the board.
That's how I got comfortable too. Actually,
yeah. So you'll get on mic, right? That's how. But you started.
I don't know. You got to speak through other people. You got to speak through Glenn Beck saying, "All of us feel like we're living through a barn fire."
That was how I started to understand Matt's psyche. I was like, what's going on with Matt? And then I started to realize, oh, that's
quite a
lot of disturbing drops today.
All of us feel like we're trapped in a barn fire.
Jesus Christ. So that's how you do it. Of course, if you haven't yet, hit subscribe on YouTube. Spread the word. On Tuesday's Michael Brooks show, Malika Jabali and I made fun of Beto O'Rourke, explained why Hillary Clinton's misconceptions about Wisconsin are relevant for not only winning 2020, but rebuilding an actual multiracial, labor-oriented, building probably for the first time, a multiracial, labor-oriented left in the United States. Kim Ives, who is the English language editor of Haiti Liberté, came on to talk about, ongoing, of course, U.S. interference in Haiti, but also this insane story of these mercenaries U.S. mercenaries going to Port-au-Prince to try to transfer $100 million out of an escrow account into the president of Haiti's direct account. I think it was how it went. Very sort of Vice with substance style story, which is actually a lot of that is very TMBS. There's a lot of like Vice with a little bit more, Vice with marks in it, kind of.
I'd be interested in the history of mercenaries.
I think that's an illicit history that we will prepare for patrons.
Because it's such a, like, we should outlaw that shit. And thinking about, like, all
it's incredible it is an outlaw.
Yeah, like the Tiger Swan group that, like, it used to be...
Tiger Swan was at the Dakota
Access Pipeline.
Yep, the Doppel protest.
It used to be, like, you could basically try to FOIA the CIA for a lot of this information, but now it's outsourced to, like, private companies, which makes it entire, like...
Well,
it's the same shit, just privatized.
Mark Ames wrote an incredible piece. I forget the name of it, but Mark Ames wrote this really good piece about how Seymour Hersh's first major setback, like Seymour Hersh in the late 60s and said he exposes the My Lai massacre. He's writing these reports on all of these various CIA abuses and interventions, but he went after, I believe it was some type of private law firm that sat at some incredibly shady nexus of private power and intelligence services, and they used the fact that they were in the private sector to threaten to bleed the New York Times dry to the point where the story became like a nothing burger story because it was so managed. And now when you amplify that times a gazillion in the privatized world we're in, there's no doubt about that. So that was what we covered on Tuesday. This Sunday, strategy for the left. We're talking about that for patrons. But we also covered the African National Congress and a whole bunch of other things where it's, if you haven't checked it out, you're really sleeping on it. Something that I think at this point we're very proud of. Patreon.com/TMBS, Patreon.com/TMBS. Also, Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. I just want to say really quickly, too, I don't always say this, but subscribe to the Bomb feed for Woke Bros with Waz and I. It's a really good show, and if you're interested in this world, which I think you should be, the show we just did with Trey from Count the Dings on Nipsey Hussle is actually really powerful, and I think super relevant because he was, in and of itself, a very interesting and important artist, but there's also a lot to understand about Los Angeles that you should know. And Trey helped lead us through it, and it was an incredible interview, and I would go subscribe to the Bomb feed and listen to all Woke Bros as well. Matt, Literary Hangover.
For patrons, actually, later this afternoon, I'm putting up the Oscar Wilde episode, The Soul of Man Under Socialism. Sweet. Was Oscar Wilde a sort of proto fully automated luxury space communist? Well, you got the gay part, definitely.
Oh, right. I was going to say one part down.
But it turns out he was actually pro, like, machinery will do some of this drudgery stuff. And we sort of go into his inspirations. There's the arts and crafts movement. Have you heard of that?
Mm-mm.
It's like this sort of like communist, these Victorian sort of like, William Morris made a process for making wallpaper, but he was also like a sort of early socialist anarchist, like friends with Kropotkin and that sort of stuff. And Wilde was sort of milling around all these sorts of guys, going to their socialist lectures in the 1880s and stuff like that. So we get into Wilde, the genuine sort of anarcho-socialist of around the turn of the century.
Fascinating. Don't sleep on Literary Hangover. Check out The Antifada. Of course, that's Jamie's show.
Also, there's I don't know if we don't maybe not link to it, but there's like Hill of Roses or there's some if you find it on Twitter, we'll probably retweet it, but there's a March Madness bracket going on, so we might need some of your support on that. So check out our respective Twitter feeds.
Vote TMBS.
Yeah, MR's fine.
Vote Insurgency. All right, folks, we will see you in the fun half. We're here. Welcome to the fun half, folks. Calling into the system now. Getting myself organized. Getting organized. Let's start with a very fun place to start. Making fun of dummy Dave Rubin. And this video is incredible. Somebody tweeted it at me. And they said something to the effect of, check out Dave Rubin doing an impression of you doing an impression of Dave Rubin. Now, as always, I got to give Mike Racine props. He's sort of a major innovator.
He's like Prometheus of the Dave Rubin impression.
Right. He nailed it. He definitely took the like essence Dave Rubin and got it across for us. But so that's the like, you know, my thing that I always go like, well, I'm interested in ideas and yeah, but I'm interested in ideas. So what happens in this clip is actually genuinely mind-blowing, because apparently, I guess it's like Tim Pool must have been on Dave's show, and now like Dave is getting interviewed by Tim.
Yeah, it's like Tim was at the Dave Rubin Estates. I don't know, wherever he records it. And
Rubin Estates.
They recorded a Rubin report. And then just right after, Tim Pool got his set up his GoPros or something, and
Tim's like, "Hey, can I turn the tables on you?"
Yeah, and they recorded this. And actually, to be fair to Tim Pool, who I said wasted a class period at NYU when he guest lectured a class, I still resent that. He kind of grills. Well,
yeah, this is what's incredible. This is the okay. So in addition, everybody knows, but we'll still find anyways. How funny. Look, of course, Dave Rubin's a total idiot. Right? Obviously. So that's going to be funny. But this is also like the second interaction. And this is based on the first interaction where Joe Rogan, who's like friendly with Dave Rubin, just humiliated him in the infamous building code saga.
Which was immediately following the infamous sending chickens through the mail saga.
So, right. The chickens through the mail saga. So I don't even remember which came first in that. It's
the mail, the chickens,
the chicken or the building code.
The chicken or the building code.
Once Rogan reminded him that the United States Postal Service is the only way to send chickens through the mail.
Then he was like, but what about building codes? Theirs looks like something.
I'm a connoisseur of ideas, so I can quickly pivot to another example that's gonna, I guess, maybe not also prove my point.
So Tim Pool here, I got to say, yeah, he's being a little unexpectedly aggressive. Like, if I'm Dave Rubin, it's like, hey, I just gave you a free platform, and I don't ask questions. Why are you asking me questions?
I thought we were homies.
I thought we were cool.
I always think it's like I see these people that are hating me all the time, and I'm like, who are you? What is wrong with you that you're waking up and you're thinking, oh, I got to figure out what Rubin tweeted today to go after him? It's like, listen, I'm doing my thing. If you don't like it, I said this before, but don't watch. It's okay.
you were on Rogan once or...
No, but it's also okay to do this. Like, it's fun.
This is the marketplace of ideas,
yes, marketplace of ideas. Dave, like, you can go do your thing, and you can, be a bagman and idiot for the worst interests in the world, from corporations to oligarchy to racism, we can make fun of you.
It's not personal. We're just scrutinizing ideas.
It's not personal. I'm just really interested in the ideas. All right, that's a really disturbing freeze frame there. Let's keep playing.
I always think it's like I see these people that are hating me all the time, and I'm like, who are you? What is wrong with you that you're waking up and you're thinking, oh, I got to figure out what Rubin tweeted today to go after him? It's like, listen, I'm doing my thing. If you don't like it, I said this before, but don't watch. It's okay.
You were on Rogan once, or were you on more?
3 times.
So there was one particular incident where Rogan was asking you about why you believe in less government control.
Yeah.
People felt like you didn't know what you were talking about, that you were advocating for a position, that you weren't...
No, so this was, I think specifically, this is the last time I was on Rogan, and we were talking about building codes, I think was the specific part of it, yeah.
Oh, you've been dragged
And I kept, yeah. And I said, we were talking, well, it was in the framework of talking about limited government. And I said at the beginning of this is not like my particular point of interest, like building codes or even regulation specifically, like the nitty-gritty parts of regulation. I like talking about ideas. That's what I like talking about. So, like, we got into some nitty-gritty thing about about building code regulation. And I said something like you could have private regulation for some of this, and that you'd have an agreement between the buyer of the house and the seller of the house, that maybe that's not exactly the role for government. But several times in that.
Okay, so this guy is very stupid. But what I love the steps there. Because first it's like, I would like hazard a guess that unless there's like a YouTube channel that's like dedicated to, you know, this is how you build a house, there's probably none of us that are specifically interested in like building codes. So I like how he went from like, I'm not really interested in building codes to then like, I'm not interested in regulation as a category. Okay. Like building codes is a pretty specific technical subset of regulation. And the thing is, you kind of are interested in regulation because you were saying on a national platform that they were useless and didn't serve any good. And then you got to the building code part where your subset example, well, let's just watch this.
Anyway, they would cut a lot more if there weren't. That's the way you get them. You get them to the U.S. Postal Service. But you don't get them to UPS.
I'm pretty sure, though, that if the USPS stopped, it didn't exist anymore, you'd still get chickens delivered. And Amazon could probably do it even more effectively. That's my point. It's like, I'm not saying these things have...
Amazon uses the U.S. Postal Service to deliver their goods. Anyways, go ahead. That's
these things have to be eliminated tomorrow. I'm not even really calling for them to be eliminated. But just generally, what problem would you... Everything you're building here right now, right? Do you want the government to tell you how to do all these things and all the regulations that you got to have your electric thing this far from this and like all of
the regulations like that for construction are important though. You do have to make sure that people don't do stupid shit. But sure generally, you don't have a power line that's near a water line. There's a lot of.
But I would put most of that on the builders though. They want to build things that are good. Now I get it.
That's not true. Listen, people
people are going to build
corners all the time. Like you have to have regulations when it comes to construction methods, or people are going to get fucked.
They cut corners when there are regulations anyway.
They do. They would cut a lot more if there weren't regulations.
I'm not totally.
You go to third world countries and look at construction methods. They're fucking dangerous.
Yeah.
That's why schools collapse on kids in foreign countries sometimes. Like,
well, I'm not telling you that I'm against all regulation, period. That's where I said intellectually I like that argument because you could make I think you can make a very sound argument that competition would force people to do better work.
No, to be fair, when I hear that, I do think to myself, well, I mean, this just sounds like a guy who's more idea oriented. That's a blue sky, big picture thinker right there.
There's two kinds of thinkers. There's the nitty gritty guys and there's the idea guys. And Dave is purely the latter.
Oh yeah, he exists on a really exalted plane.
I think you can make a pretty strong argument that what I'm saying is actually not as dumb as it sounded for the past couple of minutes.
Hey, I have an idea. What if this actually wasn't me making a complete ass of myself in front of millions of people?
There's one thing. I mean, think of how much faster we could build billions if we didn't care about putting water lines next to outlets and faucets underneath.
That's amazing. It was like he has an I bet, I haven't thought about it, but I am sure that if I wanted to do that job and be a pure hack like that, you could find I mean, isn't it ridiculous that I don't know, you want to open a pizza parlor and the bathroom needs to,
Well, a simple one is, new construction shouldn't require a certain amount of parking spaces because that's basically a subsidy to the automobile industry.
Right. Or some type of exactly. Or some type of, you could find, and then it's like he has an anti-ear. Because first he's like, well, the post office, you can get chickens. And then it's like, okay, well, actually, no, literally you did get your chickens from the post office because that's the only way they're sent. By the way, the classic libertarian move there would have been yeah, and why? I mean, I wish I didn't have the government forced me to use them to get my chickens. And you go down some dumb rabbit hole like that. But then he goes to buildings. And it's okay, that's an interesting one because just even you're queuing buildings. Unless I'm a complete demented dingbat that calls into radio shows to complain that water is treated, you might intuitively kind of go to no, that actually sounds like a place that I kind of would like a little bit of oversight on.
You're on the San Andreas Fault recording your YouTube show.
Right, yeah. Yeah, then it's like, and then doesn't he actually literally himself go to like, which wires go? Like, doesn't he actually say that before Rogan?
Yeah, he's like, do you want your electric thing near this?
Right, and it's like, yes. That's the whole fucking point. He goes to all of the wrong, like he goes to like and that's what leads Rogan could do his whole like, no, dude, that's actually pretty fucking important, bro.
When you're getting turned back by Rogan and Tim Pool like that, not known for their incredulity and like, Jeremy Paxman type approach to guests, you might have to look inward.
Yeah, turn the ideas on oneself, Dave. All right, let's take a call. You're calling from a 509 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey guys, this is Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan, the great Ronald Reagan. Thank you for calling. What's on your mind?
Dave Rubin reminds me of this guy I knew who, in college, who would have these big ideas, and they were ideas like, and he wasn't high, but he'd say they should make a battery that's like really small, but also really powerful, and also like it lasts a long time.
Exactly.
But yeah, that's an idea people are probably already working on.
What if there was a battery, dude, that was really small, but it actually powered big things?
Yeah. So, hey, I wanted to talk to you guys about Beto.
Okay. Beto sucks. Yes.
Well, I don't know. Like, do you remember how it was a big deal that Hillary didn't have a good reason for running?
Right.
Like, what was the reason? Oh, well, because it's her turn or whatever, and people thought that was weird. But it seems to me that Beto has the best reason for running.
Okay, which is?
Which is that he was born to do it.
I never thought of it. He was literally born for it. Okay. That is pretty solid reason.
Okay. What if it's true, though? If it's true,
he's the chosen one.
How would he know that he was the chosen one, though? Like, how would we?
More importantly, how would we know?
Yeah, how would we know? What would be this? Well, he did tell us, Matt.
Okay, right, fair enough.
Well, so you remember when Moses rolled up on Pharaoh and was like, "Hey, God said you need to let us go," and Pharaoh was like, "I don't even know who you're talking about."
Right.
Who is your God? What are you talking about?
Right.
Well, what happened to Pharaoh?
He got rolled.
Didn't end well.
So, anyways, I'm just saying, nobody else is even pretending that God is on their side, or that they've been called or chosen, and you guys don't seem to be taking that very seriously. So.
But didn't Moses like speak with like a speech impediment? Like, didn't Moses have like a lot more qualities that would make him like an unexpected?
Well, he had a staff turned into a snake. Like, that was cool.
Yeah, didn't he kind of send some signals other than just like sort of like
skateboard out of In and Out?
Skateboard out of In and Out and give like really annoying like sort of greatest hit speeches and jerk his body around while he did it?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we got to wait for like the serpent staff thing, maybe.
You know how
I'm waiting to hear Beto's take on YouTube news podcast set design. I want to see Beto weigh in on
what's that?
I want to see Beto weigh in on the Majority Report Pac-Man set design controversy, and I can only predict it would be like, there are a lot of great shows on YouTube, and they're all great. You have David Pac-Man, you have Majority Report, but you also have Rational National, TMBS. These are great. The Young Turks.
We're living in an unprecedented moment of YouTube content proliferation.
And some of it is not as good, but some of it is great. And I make a commitment that I will know those shows' names over the years.
I would just say that if we had sort of incontrovertible proof that Beto was the sort of son of God, chosen one for our moment, and God chose a person like him for this, I would probably redouble my commitment to atheism and say I don't want any part of this.
Like, God is very cliche.
Pick a different God.
Yes.
I mean, this God sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. My God.
I do want to say about Pac-Man, I don't know. I wasn't gonna bring it up, but you guys brought it up.
Christ, I didn't really bring it up like that, Ronald.
He made
Yes, okay.
You totally.
Yes.
He made a video calling me out.
Whoa.
And raising questions about if I'm a real lawyer. Did I pass the bar on the first try? And
did you?
Yeah, I did. First of all.
Okay, good job.
Yes.
Of course he did.
Okay, thank you.
Listen to the guy how he designs his phone calls. Of course he passed the bar.
And this is all a big distraction, of course. These are sort of like non sequiturs. I have nothing to do with this. It's not my fault that he is in blatant violation of Sam's trademark.
It's interesting though, because he's a victim of Sam's, Sam's obviously getting stolen from in terms of the set design. But I think it is interesting because I feel like when you asked Sam about the food bucket, which by the way has been discovered and we have it, and don't worry, we've got this. Sam, when you asked Sam about the other food bucket, didn't Sam also start to ask you about your grades in law school or something, or am I misremembering? Was that another time? There's something about these guys though going on counterattack about your law school credentials when you're out, frankly, not in the coastal elite bubble, actually helping people.
Yeah,
it's pretty offensive.
Well, helping people by policing property. I don't know what this new angle is.
Whoa. The
Civil War. Look, here's the deal. The other day I'm watching the live show, and it rolls into a Pac-Man clip, just like YouTube's internet brain deciding that this was going to be the next thing I wanted to watch. And it was very confusing. And, I don't know. Anyways, have a good one.
Ronald Reagan, thank you. Talk to you soon. Let's see.
Intellectual property is there to be stolen, folks.
Word. You're calling from a Skype. Are you there?
Yeah. Hey, Michael.
Hey.
My name is Alfonso. I'm calling from Germany.
I can't understand you. You're Alfonso from where?
From Germany.
Hey, how you doing? What's on your mind?
I'm fine, man. I wanted to talk about Latin America. I'm originally, I'm not going to tell you yet, but I want to ask you a few questions.
We can do one question. one, but we got to be tight here, buddy. What's the question?
No problem. If you would have to say what are the three biggest crises in Latin America right now?
Mm-hmm. What are the three biggest crises?
That's my question. What are the three biggest crises in Latin America?
The reversal of the pink tide government and rise of right-wing governments across the region. The collapse of commodities, although I don't know if that's as current right now, but that's definitely played a role. Reassertion of more direct U.S. interference.
No.
Going back to 2009.
I mean human rights crisis.
Oh, that's a totally different. That's a totally different question.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Human rights crisis. I mean,
I don't know enough to say that specifically, country by country.
Well, I wanted to talk to you or ask you to talk about Nicaragua.
Okay.
I'm originally from Nicaragua.
Right.
I'm in Germany now, but I'm originally from Nicaragua.
Okay.
I listen to your show and also of course the Michael Brooks show.
Mm-hmm.
But I've seen that you've covered Haiti, you've covered Venezuela, you've covered Brazil, of course.
Right.
But right. Since April of 2018, there has been a crisis in Nicaragua where till now 500 people have died.
Okay.
By the hands of the government and by the hands of paramilitary forces. And
against the government.
The rebellion is against the government,
So I'm saying, in other words, both sides of that equation have innocents, have killed innocent people. Is that what you're saying?
You could say that, but there is clearly a disparity between the force of the government, which has paramilitary forces, and
so you're saying the paramilitary forces are for the government as well? Okay, I didn't understand. Okay, got it. Okay, yeah.
You don't have to believe me. You can check Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch.
So it's definitely not that I don't believe you. It's that here's the problem with covering Nicaragua for me. Some of these, like, I know, as an example, enough about Haiti or Brazil as two examples to start, if that makes sense. So I know enough from my own reading of, like, okay, this person is a good resource. This is a smart way to cover it, right? Which is my job on, like, everything, right? It's to synthesize, present information well, give analysis on things, and then also bring on people who are either really deeply immersed, like, Mike Hanna, right? Like, I have an understanding of how the Middle East works. I've spent time there, and then so I know how to frame the conversation, but then someone like Mike Hanna is, like, just unparalleled in his knowledge base and his experience, not only the Middle East, but actually elsewhere, right? So I guess this is a long way of saying that I do not have the same ground. I mean, I know a bit about the 80s. I know about U.S. interference there. I know the sort of narrative of the Sandinistas as kind of being, sort of heroes, but then Ortega having very real problems and very real abuses. So I know that, but I don't know enough beyond that. Then the other part that's difficult, just to be blunt, is, I'm calibrating these places. So in some ways, like, Brazil is really, it's easy. Like, the Workers' Party, I will defend all day. Lula is a political prisoner, and the U.S. is aligned with the right there. So that's a very straightforward story. I mean, there's a lot of complexity to it, but it's very straightforward. Venezuela, in a different time, I would actually be much more interested in having really full critiques of what happened and what went wrong, under Maduro and in the broader Bolivarian project. But the first and foremost thing right now is to just oppose U.S. intervention. That is my primary obligation, being the United States. The closest I could tell from Nicaragua is that there is a smaller version of something similar going on, where the U.S. does want to see a change there. They want to get rid of Ortega. Now, I oppose that.
Yeah, that's right.
I oppose that, full stop. And I'm also aware of the very, I'm aware, I'll just put it this way, of very credible charges against Ortega. So I just need to study it more and figure out where to turn. Like, I know for Venezuela, as an example, like, I like Eva Gollinger's perspective. I don't agree with her on everything, but I feel comfortable covering it as this was actually a really noble and important experiment and initiative. It has its own failings and its own corruption, and our primary sort of opposition should be against a U.S. coup. That really reflects how I look at the world. I'm sure it would actually be quite similar probably in Nicaragua, frankly, but I don't have the person to guide me there yet. Sorry?
I would have to disagree.
Okay.
In Venezuela, there are 80 million people.
Mm-hmm.
Amnesty International has put the death toll at around 200.
Mm-hmm.
In Nicaragua, there are 5 million people, and the death toll is around 500 to 600. More than 800 political prisoners.
Okay.
More than 30,000 people exiled because of the crisis, to Costa Rica mostly, but almost 30,000 people, and not to come here and talk and not let you say anything, but there is a real crisis. Nicaragua is the second poorest country in Latin America.
Mm-hmm.
Nicaragua has been since the 90s a very struggling country, a country where right-wing forces have concentrated their power, and Ortega came to power in 2006 to be like a counterpart of this right wing model.
Yep.
But he went in, and he made agreements with the private enterprise. And
right. No, I'm familiar with that part of it. Yep.
Yeah, he came to some sort of a neoliberal with socialist rhetoric. And I think, well, it's my perspective, because you of course talk a lot about international crisis, that Nicaragua should be, of course, because I'm Nicaraguan and because I know how many people have died and how many people are prisoners, and how Ortega has consolidated power, violating the Constitution. And I just came here to propose to you to read about Nicaragua. You will find a lot of information, because there is a lot of information in the internet, because every international organization has been to Nicaragua. The OAS was in Nicaragua.
So I will.
And
I'll just say real quick. Number one, yes, I'll do that 100%. Second, almost nothing could change my perspective on U.S. interference there. Now, that is totally different from, is there a third force of people on the left who are in opposition that we could have critical support for that are not a U.S. proxy? I would be very interested in that. And then the third thing I want to say, and I'm not using this to question, Ortega's record or anything like that, but I do think that organizations like Amnesty International and particularly Human Rights Watch have a very questionable record right now in Latin America. They have not spoken out Lula being the most prominent example. They do not have, and this actually goes back to the 70s, and Naomi Klein actually has written well on this. When human rights discourses got separated from social and material indicators, and they speak out on things, of course, that are completely unacceptable wherever they take place. And I loathe whitewashing of anywhere. So as an example, I opposed intervention in Syria. I am a critic, obviously, of CIA and Gulf actions there, but I also don't deny for a second that Assad has committed obscene war crimes, and that, as have the Russians, as have Iranians, as have basically every single force there. I would say, arguably with the exception of the Kurds, though frankly maybe even not them, right? Let alone the Turks, okay, and let alone the United States. So I am not interested in having any type of, we need to be clear about these things.
Of course.
But so I agree with you. And that being said, there is a reason, though, that these human rights organizations they tend to not have, and particularly in a place like Latin America, they can document abuses, but they're not contextual analysis. They don't have a critique of U.S. power there, and they don't speak about anything else other than.
Okay.
I have a problem. I have a fundament. So I'm not questioning your presentation of Ortega at all, but I will not,
I know
uncritically accept those. You know what I'm saying?
But you can look at any. I mean, any.
I'll look into it. You know what, man? I just wanted to make that larger point, but I will 100% look into it, and I appreciate the call.
Look at the Intercept article they wrote. The Intercept, from Glenn Greenwald, the diary.
I will, of course, I know the Intercept, and I will definitely read their coverage on Nicaragua, and I will figure out how to do some coverage of it. Thank you. All right, let's do a few IMs. Eso Terra Firma, been watching for a couple years. Love you guys. More to follow. Okay. Thank you. Anthony from Baltimore, dude, I hope you finish your book. You get a chance to tell Sam Harris to buy and read your entire book so he can argue with the full context and also call him a bad faith actor. Well, not only would Sam Harris need to read, and by the way, any of his fans who ever tweet at me would need to not only read my entire book, they need to watch every single YouTube clip I've ever done on every single topic.
They should probably make sure to buy the book in both text and audio. Is there going to be audio?
I don't know yet, but if you don't buy the book in every single form and watch every single YouTube video, you're fundamentally misrepresenting me.
Taking them out of context.
And taking me out of context in a morally egregious, offensive manner, and I'll just say that up front. Parliamentary cricket enthusiast. Mr. Speaker, Britain has a long history with executions, and with the chastising of our former colonies, we created many innovative, long, drawn-out ways to put people to death that we can propagate it around the world that we will judge you for as having... Okay.
Bit too far for the bit?
Yeah, I don't... Yes. Okay. But Theresa May should resign and there should be elections. Okay. Let's touch on this. Much more Brexit news to follow, both on this show and on TMBS. But this is important, to say the least. In the United Kingdom, I don't know if you're not playing it yet, right? In the United Kingdom, there is a leader of the parliamentary opposition. His name is Jeremy Corbyn. If you have been reading the British tabloids and listening to hysterical people in the United States, he is some type of globe-defining, monster. Now, what he is actually doing is saying that the United Kingdom's crisis predates Brexit. It certainly goes back to deregulation and neoliberalization and making the UK a dangerous financial hub and an oligarchy. It certainly goes back to New Labour and Tony Blair and Gordon Brown's alliance with the financial industry and other corporate interests and selling out of unions and so on, the classic global third way story. And that under the Tory governments, going back to the coalition of Cameron and the Lib Dems, then Cameron's second solo Tory government, and now Theresa May, the ruthless, sustained austerity campaign against this country, the United Kingdom, have increased poverty. There's a massive amount of xenophobia and so on. Now, he's been trying to run a third way, essentially himself, on Brexit. And I'm not sure I agree with every single move he's made, but I do agree with the basic premise that this government clearly is unable to function and there need to be elections. And that is the bottom line. And when people go out and vote, if they are voting for Labour, they're voting for solid moves towards restoring and creating some sense of social democracy in a country that has been absolutely devastated by the right and by the Tories. Now, that's what's going on here. And also, this is someone who has had critiques of U.S. empire, of UK foreign policy. He wants to know why there's still forces in Afghanistan. That is a natural, sane question for anybody. He wants to, stop the campaign in Yemen, as an example, that we talked about earlier. Now, you may disagree with this or that comment or inclination he has, and that's fine. But the notion that this is anything other than, frankly, democratic socialism at home and basic herbivorous human rights orientation abroad is ridiculous. And it's also really dangerous because it leads to clips and actions like this. We're going to play this now silently, but this is video footage. I believe these are British troops deployed in Afghanistan doing target practice. Okay, this looks normal. They're practicing firing. So far, so good. Nothing particularly distinct about this. You're going to ask yourself why we even watching this.
Not super safe with the muzzle control, but
not super safe with the muzzle control, which is fair enough. Oh, they're shooting a poster of Jeremy Corbyn as their practice. That's what they're doing. Now, there was a report in The Independent that came out a couple days ago of an unnamed general saying that they would consider intervening on any government that threatened their national security. There were reports in the 70s that a coup was seriously considered, and I believe in the beginning stages of planning were acted upon by the UK military against the Labour government in the 70s. So, this is really serious. And I think one of the most extraordinary things about the UK, at least in terms of presentation, I mean, some of it is as simple as here's just a frontline politician who wants to tax oligarchs, and that is a total brain meltdown for the entire, essential order that's run the world for the last couple of decades. Okay, so that's 99% of it. Then, you know what, frankly, in a sane discourse, and we actually did an illicit history on this for TMBS, there's nuances you can get to around the left and anti-Semitism in the UK, and there's clearly been times where I think objectively Jeremy Corbyn has misstepped. Now, then that gets equated, though, with a vicious campaign of which people like Tony Blair and Gordon Brown are actively a part of, to, as in here, as in the United States, equate any and all criticism of Israel with an act of anti-Semitism, and in fact criminalize and try to silence the speech of those who object to an apartheid state in Israel. So in a sane world, we could make Jeremy Corbyn better on this rhetoric and this sensitivity, as almost anybody could be made to be better on everything. But in the world we're in, we have a campaign to delegitimize a solid social democrat with a plan to save the United Kingdom from emergency that will benefit everybody in the United Kingdom, other than the oligarchs. And the answer has been a sustained, relentless propaganda campaign from the corporations, from the tabloids, from the right-wing interests in his own party, from a former prime minister who's a war criminal and a liar. And now we see intimations from the military that there's literal coup and insurrection talk. And the only conversation in response to Corbyn is that somehow he represents a crisis. The United Kingdom is in a crisis. And that crisis was created and preset by Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair. And it has been blown up by David Cameron, and as well as blown up and extended by Theresa May, but also, frankly, blown up in her face because she's completely unable to handle it. Waiting in the wings when Theresa May leaves leadership of the Tory party, which she will sooner or later, is Boris Johnson, a xenophobic, sort of Donald Trump-esque but smarter, horrific aristocratic trust fund baby with far-right populist tendencies, but too much cynicism to even have that as a thoroughgoing conviction. Who helped make Brexit happen to essentially help himself with a couple of news cycles. And you will see, as Tony Blair did the other day, say that Boris is a very compelling campaigner and Labour should dump a leader who has overwhelmingly won the support of his party again and again and again and again, and actually pulled off an incredible campaign performance a couple of summers ago with the entirety of the UK establishment smearing and lying and attempting to destroy him, while he doggedly came out and said things like, no, we should protect the NHS, and we should actually move into new, incredibly innovative and amazing proposals that he and John McDonnell have put forward on things like workers' ownership and democratizing the economy. So we need to get Corbyn elected prime minister, and then we need to be incredibly watchful of just how far these forces will go. We'll get to Brazil and Lula in a couple of minutes. I mean, the obvious example there. But, apparently in today's world, these echoes might ring out in places that people like to talk about as a sort of fully developed democracy.
Well, read about the Spanish Civil War.
Right. So actually, let's get to this. So there's some controversy because Bernie Sanders is doing a Fox News town hall. So I just wanted to say three things about this, and then we're actually going to play a clip from the last time he did a Fox News town hall in 2016. Fox News is a cancer. It's a essentially state propaganda. It's white nationalist. It's I'll say it again. It's a cancer. on American society. I think that the Democratic Party was absolutely right to not have a debate under the auspices of Fox News. Because the notion of having these people up on stage as candidates getting far-right talking points and questions as a frame for the debate is ludicrous. So I'm making zero moral equivalency here, obviously, but here's like the difference in my mind, because I think Bernie should absolutely do this, and I think it's insane to expect any presidential candidate to not do a town hall. And I see, some people who are sort of moralizing and nitpicking about this have made some of their very own sort of interesting choices about, who they put forward. But that being said, I think that he's right to do this. And here's the difference that I would say. If the Majority Report or the Young Turks or even Democracy Now! Were to say, we want to host the Republican presidential debate, that would be awesome. And the Republicans, you know what? If they said, no, I think we'll pass on that, or the Libertarians, I wouldn't hold that against them. That would seem like a pretty sort of probably a wise move. Now, if one of these platforms said, we're going to give you an hour to make your case in an adversarial environment, but with an audience of voters, and we'll see in a second how this ends up working and could be enormously to Bernie Sanders' advantage, it would be insane of them not to say yes. So I think, look, the bottom line is that Bernie Sanders is running for president, and this is an opportunity to reach voters. And even if it is 1% of people watching that could get flipped, that's how votes work. And I do not think that his going on there and making the case, making the argument is a legitimization of the white nationalism platform. And that, by the way, holds across the board. My beef is basically almost never, I'm never say never, but almost never the actuality of going on a particular platform. It's what you do when you're on it. That's my bottom line. So if somebody went on Fox and said, hey, I'm a Democrat, but we need to, ICE needs to terrorize people. Well, of course, it's disqualifying. If you go on Fox and you do this, I think it's actually enormously effective.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I'll just mention a Minority Report. Sam Sachs, the District Sentinel, said, I don't think Bernie should go on Fox News. It's not that I'm concerned he'll add legitimacy to the network. It's that the left should have principles when it comes to engaging with racist, fascist orgs. And I think like that principle is one worth noting, even if we are going to give Bernie a pass for breaking it at this point.
Absolutely, that's fair.
I happen to believe, and I know not everybody agrees with me, I believe that healthcare is a right of all people. I believe that there is something wrong when we are spending...
where did that right come from in your mind?
Being a human being. Being a human being. And what I believe, Brett, you may disagree with me, I believe...
Pause that. I just love, because it's exactly right. That is where the right came from. And Brett's, it's funny when a kind of meathead guy does that's a very Shapiro, where did it come from? Sort of like dumb, pedantic
constitutional fundamentalism.
Yeah, constitutional fundamentalism or religious nonsense or whatever. And I just like the subtext, and I actually do think it's an effective debate tactic for people on the left, is when you state something that anybody with a beating heart should agree with, you can always be like, Brett, you're free to be an asshole. I love that. Go ahead.
I believe, Brett, you may disagree with me, I believe that if she is poor and you are rich, she is entitled to the same quality health care that you have because she's a human being.
Boom. Excellent. Another reminder of why he's the candidate.
That's ridiculous. I mean, imagine coming away from that and being like, well...
but they have more money.
Come on.
Yeah, but they have more money, so they have more value. I mean, that is literally the sociopathy of that position.
You talk about UBI and things like that, about basically that give into the idea of how important money is in a society. But doing things like just everyone gets the same health care, no bullshit, that basically, sorry, your money's no good here.
Absolutely.
That's how you make money less powerful in society. Like, it needs to not be a reserve to go to like basically survive.
Absolutely. 100%. This was actually another funny moment. Wait, who is this in the video? This was another Fox News disruption. Oh, okay. I thought that was Eric Bolling for a second.
No.
I literally did. Okay. What's his face? Jack Todd Piro. Todd Piro, is
his name?
Is he related to
I don't believe so. It's just the small world of, bridge and tunnel people that work for Fox.
These pyromaniacs.
All right, so he's in a cafe in Riverside, Montana. He's out in the real America.
Haven't been there.
And he's basically, the point of these segments is really clear. You're supposed to go and find some people that look like quote unquote real Americans, and from the bias of a Fox News audience, and then they're supposed to validate, barbarism. But he ran into a little bit of a snag.
Of construction. Both of these guys work in construction, and he says immigrants are vital to the construction business. They just have to come the right way. Why do you say that?
Well, that's right. Hispanic immigrants in particular are a very big part of the labor force in general. Nobody should be judged or discriminated about where they're from or who they are, but it's predicated upon them becoming legal citizens the right way.
Ben, thank you.
Well,
Jack.
All right, that's so far so good-ish.
I mean, you got to make it a lot easier to become citizens the quote right way.
Right. Exactly. No, I meant from a Fox perspective. So the guy is, I have all sorts of problems with that statement, but I would imagine that the Fox viewer might want a little bit more red meat than an embracing of bad immigration policies by reasserting that racism is bad. I mean, after all, this is a network that has Laura
That's
Ingraham.
Some rhino talk right there.
Yeah, that's some rhino talk. Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham ain't saying that shit. But, whatever, fair enough. What's next?
Citizens the right way.
Ben, thank you. Jack is an info specialist, and he really wants Howard Schultz to talk about climate change, specifically the Green New Deal, which you support. Why do you support it?
Yeah, it's really important we keep below 2 degrees Celsius of average warming. Otherwise, the consequences are going to be devastating.
How do we pay for it?
Yeah, how do we pay for World War II? At the end of the day, when something is this important, our economy is going to suffer if we don't pay for it.
Okay, but you do agree with the sentiment that this is as big a deal, climate change that is, as World War II?
Yeah, I mean, a little over 400,000 Americans died in World War II, and climate change is killing 150,000 people per year at least.
Okay, let's talk about the money, because that's a huge part of this. How are we going to pay for it?
Yeah. So during World War II, for one thing, the government just pushed some of the cash up front and raised some tax on some folks. But at the end of the day, it stimulated the economy so much that everyone benefited.
Okay, so to review, you are in favor of raising taxes in order to support the Green New Deal.
If that's the optimal solution the economists sort out, I'll go with that.
Jack, thank you for your time. And finally...
MMT has gotten to...
That was good MMT
Riverside,
right
Montana.
there.
Oh, that's Riverside. It must
Missouri.
be Riverside, Missouri.
Oh,
yeah.
my bad.
Yeah. I was going to say, I know every town in Montana. I've never heard of a Riverside.
Oh, my bad. Riverside, Missouri.
Every town in Montana, eh?
I'm joking. It's like 12 of them.
Winnipeg Greg, MR, TMBS, Cumtown, and the Rational National are facing off in the latest round of that Progressive March Media Madness contest. I voted for the show that had the most Canadian coverage. Wah, wah, wah.
Well,
and somehow that wasn't the
What a
Canadian former political candidate with National in his name. So you voted for MR over Rational National?
We definitely don't do more Canadian coverage.
Yeah, I don't think that's true, dude. Tough bracket, but best of luck.
Cumtown.
Yeah,
they do some Canada coverage.
Tough bracket, but best of luck to MR and TMBS, the homes of progressive Canadian content. It's funny, for all I poo-poo it, we do some, particularly on oil stuff, Canada content, and also on Caribbean debt stuff. Canada's role and an illicit history. You know what? Maybe he did vote for TMBS because for all I joke about it, we actually do cover Canada a lot.
I can think of there was that Canada Nice thing that we did.
Yeah, we did Canada Nice
a few months ago, and then we did the was it Tomanisha John on the debt stuff? Or was
Tomanisha John on debt and particularly Canadian business. So wait a second,
Thanks for the vote, I guess.
And the illicit history of the Maple Leaf. Appreciate the vote. Thank you. So this is bullshit. we were seated way lower than we should have been seated. TMBS, I'm talking about. Actually, frankly, Majority Report too. I don't remember the Majority Report seeds, but there was a massive amount of disrespect. So the first round, this design where the top two go forward. Last round, we were in a draw with one podcast I don't remember, Hardcore History and Cumtown. We won on TMBS.
Took it all.
We took it all.
But Cumtown also
Cumtown advanced. So break
top two
us.
advanced.
So break up the categories, and then like a second round match between MR. Like, don't you want to like save that that sort of drama to like later in the tournament?
The
like,
committee really fucked up the.
Yeah, it's just a really dumb bracket.
What are the other brackets looking like, or like what are the other pools looking like right
they're
now?
wide open. There's nobody in the other.
Yeah, so this is the pool from death.
They
death
just
pool, right?
They just did like let's just put the final four in the second round.
Yeah, just call it that then.
Yeah, I mean, because
everyone else is a consolation.
Yeah, because everything else is just like totally, it's all fake news. We all know that, like, look, basically MR, Chapo, Bodega Boys, and then I would say that TMBS and maybe Cumtown could take it all. And then the Antifada could make a run. So why, like, and is Literary Hangover even in there? Did they diss Literary Hangover?
A Literary Hangover was not included.
I think that this might be
Tim Black was though.
Fake contest. Fake contest, folks. It's a fake podcast tournament.
I'm sure he's not the worst there, but
No,
he's the worst that I recognize.
Seems like a nice guy. Fake contest. Okay. So, and these will be sort of two different segments, but I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in Brazil. First, I cannot find this story about Bolsonaro and Netanyahu, but I will start with this story that is really devastating before we get to Lula. So, Jair Bolsonaro is in office now at this point, last week, actively commemorating the 1964 coup that deposed a democratic government, that brought a military junta in power, that murdered countless indigenous people, tortured and murdered others. And if you actually read, there was a really powerful piece, I think it was actually in the Washington Post, Paulo Coelho. He wrote, he's the famous Brazilian kind of spiritual writer. He wrote The Alchemist. He was tortured as a young man by the Brazilian regime. And if you read his essay on that, his editorial, that's one of the most sort of disturbing things you'll read. Bolsonaro, who dedicated his vote for the impeachment of the former president Dilma Rousseff, and that illegitimate impeachment, that judicial, that legislative coup, which has set the political stage along with the U.S. support for the entire crisis that Brazil is in, he dedicated his vote for that on behalf of the man in the military who tortured Dilma Rousseff. Dilma Rousseff was a guerrilla fighter fighting against Brazil's military dictatorship. So Bolsonaro's in charge. And it's very important, particularly as this goes out, because it's been a disastrous first couple of months. He's extremely unpopular. There's huge pushback against the efforts to gut the pension system. And there's also just the fact that this guy's an international embarrassment. There's the stories about his family's, certainly we don't know all of it yet, but they're definitely on some level literally connected with the cartel that assassinated the incredibly important young leader Marielle Franco. And so nobody likes, just on a PR level, the fact that this is a virulently anti-LGBTQ government, the fact that this is a buffoonish government, and it's considered sort of uncouth to be overtly pro-coup. And that's why actually Bolsonaro's vice president, who's a former military guy and to the far right, has been triangulating against him in some ways and sort of undermining some of his public statements. And it's very important that as this spills out, that people remember that the Wall Street Journal endorsed this candidate. that the Brazilian judiciary that has acted in a totally politicized and illegitimate fashion against President Lula, who would have almost certainly beat Bolsonaro and averted this catastrophe, the oligarchs in Brazil, the interests of U.S. and Canadian corporations that have massive interests in Brazilian oil, timber, and agriculture, they supported this happening. And they were gladly able to overlook the fascism and the buffoonery because of the opportunity for greater privatization and capital accumulation. And they might pivot off of this as it becomes more of an embarrassment if it keeps going down this trajectory. And I just want to say, there is a history of assassinations of movement leaders in Brazil. Right in the beginning of Bolsonaro's time, a couple leaders of the landless movement were machine gunned to death. And what just happened on Wednesday was that a Brazilian environmental leader, a major leader of the indigenous community, Sonia Guajajara, and I apologize as always for my pronunciations, and I'm quoting now from Telesur, an indigenous leader and vice presidential candidate for the socialism. Sonia Guajajara, who is an indigenous leader and vice presidential candidate for the Socialism and Leadership Party, confirmed Jora Hingo's death. And Jora Hingo Guajajara was murdered in the state of Maranhão in the Brazilian Amazon. They suspect that Jorginho was killed, I'm quoting again from Telesur, by illegal loggers who operate in the territory of Guajajara and the people renowned for their work as guardians of the Amazon. And now I'm back to Sonia, who said the murder was part of a sequence of deaths and murders in the logging dispute. According to data from the National Institute for Space Research, INPE, 70% of Maranhão State has been deforested. Guardians of the Amazon is a group of men of the Guajajara people who decided to fight against illegal loggers themselves in the face of government inaction. They patrol their territory in search of outside threats, and when they find loggers or hunters, they destroy their equipment and detain perpetrators and deliver them to the police later, quote unquote. Now, from that Telesur report. Now, we know that Bolsonaro has removed protections for both the Amazon and indigenous people, and the entirety of the Amazon is on the chopping block. And of course, it's an environmental story, because if you actually radically deforest the Amazon, that will affect global environmental patterns. But it is also something akin to a genocidal effort of the indigenous people there. So it goes without saying that, of course, the Trump administration supports this. And of course, Steve Bannon is connected with these people. And of course, all of the worst oil companies and every other type of nefarious corporate interest from the Western order supports and is connected to these things. But it's very important to remember that the Brazilian judiciary, we'll get to in a second, imprisoned Lula, which helped finalize the stage for this. And it's very important to remember that the New York Times and the Guardian did credulous, absurd reporting on this. It's very important to remember that even some progressive YouTube hosts thought that this Lava Jato operation, which was the politicized war against the left in Brazil, was somehow a great blow in anti-corruption, and still have not apologized or made amends or attempted to do any new work on Brazil, even though supposedly they're so concerned about U.S. interference. And the Obama administration and Clinton and Kerry State Departments actively supported the DOJ's collaboration in these efforts. So they all share part of the blame for the catastrophe of the Bolsonaro regime. And this is another major piece of this. On April 7th, Lula da Silva, who was the former president, he governed Brazil from 2003 to 2010, will have completed his first year in prison. He was put in jail without any material evidence by a independent prosecutor, Sergio Moro, who is incidentally now the justice minister for Jair Bolsonaro. Moro leaked phone conversations and wiretaps illegally in attempts to humiliate Lula and Dilma and other Workers' Party leaders. And the entirety of the conviction of Lula is based off of testimony, and there is zero material evidence for what, by the way, is also an exceedingly nothing crime, even if it were to have actually taken place, which is literally repairs on a middle-class apartment by the beach after Lula was president. This is in a country that has massive, that has politicians literally in bed with mafia cartels who are not in jail. The former president, Michel Temer, was arrested for 4 days on very serious and infinitely more documented charges and was released after 4 days in prison. Meanwhile, Lula has been held in solitary confinement with no evidence and against all norms and protocols of every type of legal precedent. Let's play a clip. This is actually, and this really is painful because, look, Lula chose to not go into exile. And he chose to even hand himself into prison, even though this was obviously a totally corrupt and politicized process. And this was the final rally he gave before handing himself in. Notice the fact that the Social Democratic Union leader who helped lead Brazil out of the military dictatorship in the 80s and took 40 million people out of poverty when he was president is the one who's actually talking about preserving the Constitution here.
Eu vou atender o mandato deles.
I'm going to attend the mandate so they won't say that I'm a fugitive.
E vou atender porque eu quero fazer a transferência
and that I'm hiding
de
myself.
responsabilidade. Eles
I'm going to
acham
let them know I'm not afraid.
que acontece nesse país
I'm going to prove my innocence. There has been ample proof offered by him and his legal team, but it will not make a difference in the current rotted, corrupt leadership of Brazil and several unusual and extrajudicial moves, including, by the way, a decision last spring that was handed down by a lower court that should have immediately released Lula. In fact, there was a couple of hours where he wasn't released. Sergio Moro, the same prosecutor that put him in jail without evidence, who's now Bolsonaro's justice minister, held him there, actually just illegally ordering a court order. The Brazilian military around this time also sent out a threatening tweet about releasing Lula. I'm going to quote briefly from Vijay Prashad, who has a really good piece out called "You Can't Have Democracy When You Put the Truth in Prison," which is on the year-long anniversary of Lula being in prison. Brazil's former president Lula will clock a year in prison this week. It's a bittersweet anniversary, not just for Lula, not just for Brazil, but for the idea of democracy. What did Lula do to deserve this time in prison? And indeed, what did his successor Dilma do to be impeached so aggressively a few years ago? Quoting ahead a little bit. Lula and Dilma represent the side of history that says that the powerful should not be allowed to do whatever they want, and when they do what they want. They should not be allowed to get away with it. Lula and Dilma, unlike the others, became heads of government. He's speaking about other political prisoners in other parts of the world. Became heads of governments, and as heads of government, they pushed agendas that rattled the old order. But they didn't break the bars. All they did was drag some of the sequestered wealth from Brazil's wealthy and try to moderate a society that has been deeply unequal for 500 years. They tackled hunger and corruption, illiteracy and indignity. The problems in Brazil remain fierce, and as any reasonable person will attest, Lula and Dilma went after them with honesty and reason. The United Nations pointed to Brazil as an example of a country that was able to eradicate hunger. A visit to federal universities set up under Lula's government showed that it was possible in terms of the provision of higher education for oppressed communities. All of this was out of the question. The oligarchy wanted their country back. The viciousness with which Dilma was impeached in April 2016 is an indication of the oligarchy's disregard for democratic norms and hunger to restore power to themselves. Brazil's president, Jair Bolsonaro, Trump of the tropics, was then a legislator. He dedicated his vote against Dilma to the colonel, the man, Brilhante Ustra, the man who tortured Dilma in 1970 during the military dictatorship. Just briefly more. Lula was a force to be reckoned with. Lula was arrested because it was clear that he, a force of nature, was likely to win the presidential elections of 2018. Last week, 464 Brazilian lawyers, all highly respecting their professions, signed a statement asking for the release of Lula. Lula, they said, did not receive the rules of due process. His defense team was not able to work effectively, and the facts of his complicity were not proved beyond a reasonable doubt. Lula, the first president from a working-class background, they wrote, had pushed an agenda on behalf of the poor, which, quote, may be one of the reasons that explain his arrest. This also is a really good book from Orr Books. Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, The Truth Will Prevail, Why I Was Condemned, which have interviews with Lula right before he was taken to prison, outlining the political situation and an explanation of the corruption of the Brazilian judiciary with regards to his case. And look, you know, there's that Corbyn story, and I don't know if you elect somebody like Bernie Sanders as president. I don't know, but put it this way, it's not going to end with like the vicious stupidity of someone like Dana Milbank. You know, if you come into power in a society that is fundamentally set to favor a small part of the population, and you challenge that, even in an incredibly moderated way, and even in Lula's case, he was aided by a commodities boom, so people are actually getting richer, you are going to profoundly offend that order. And he's a political prisoner because of that, but I think there's implications for the rest of the world, and certainly something to watch with things like capital flight as AMLO attempts to chart a different but in some ways analogous trajectory.
Yeah, none of these fights are going to be won with the placing of any single person in an office.
Never. And particularly in developing countries and places where U.S. has a dominant influence, it's our responsibility to speak on that. You know, there was the letter on this that was released a couple weeks ago, signed by many members of Congress. It included the fact that Lula was barred, but there needs to be a lot more on this. And including very specifically on Lula, we need to be in a position where if a Democrat, and obviously Sanders would be the most likely to do this, but frankly, any Democrat, they need to be pushed on this in the primary. This has big implications for foreign policy across Latin America and a U.S. role there. And we do not want a repetition of Clinton-Obama policies in Latin America, and there needs to be extreme diplomatic pressure put by the United States to release Lula from prison, period. You're calling from a 617 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, how's it going?
Hi.
Sorry, let me just step outside real quick. I apologize.
No worries.
Hey, this is Ben from Chicago.
Hey, Ben, what's going on? What's on your mind?
Big fan of all the coverage of Malika Jabali and her piece.
Oh,
Appreciate
cool.
that.
Check it out, TMDS.
Yeah. Oh, also, side note, can I just make a request that anytime Sam has a hostile interview planned, you make sure that he speaks to Judy Gold immediately beforehand?
Okay. I'll try to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it helps for the quality. So, when I was listening to the interview, I was trying to, I've been trying to find ways to get more involved myself, and wondering what types of organizations are involved in places like Milwaukee that are working to kind of reverse the trend or reverse the results of 2016 in terms of turnout. I haven't been able to find much. I was able to find one organization called Black Leaders Organizing Communities that worked on they canvassed extensively in 2018 in black neighborhoods in Milwaukee, and black turnout in Milwaukee did play a big role in defeating Scott Walker. So I definitely encourage everyone to check out organizations like that. I was wondering if you know, or if Malika has mentioned any organizations like that in Milwaukee, Wayne County, that are organizing on a grassroots level to mobilize people and increase turnout for 2020, because I mean, it's just like Democrats are not making this the priority that it needs to be. There's a Times piece today about Wisconsin in 2020 and how Democrats are focusing on that. And they did not mention black voters. It was all about, suburban moderates. And yeah, so I'd just like to know what your thoughts
So I don't
are.
know. I will ask Malaika, and I do recommend that everybody go and check out the full interview with her over at the Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel. I do think it is, very important for understanding 2020 and also what came before. I mean, I think her broader point, and again, these things are all simultaneously true. People do need to turn out, and they do matter, right? So I absolutely, of course, stand by my position of critically, I loathe Hillary Clinton. And of course, if she was president, we would be in a better position than with Donald Trump, just from a, basic human being, human level. And I also don't buy the notion, because in fact, conversely, I do accept what a deep structural crisis we were in, that in fact, there still would have been this radical energy rising up as well. So that being said, I accept that, and I don't question the need to, strategize for turnout and so on. On the other hand, the point I was trying to make yesterday is like, people are not, there's an institutional memory in people's bodies and lives, no matter who they are. People remember, particularly in a place like Wisconsin, that the Clintons were horrible on everything that would matter to a working class person. The bigger point, but I'm just telling you what Malaika really emphasizes. I mean, I don't want to turn this into just an editorial for a specific candidate, but the bottom line is like, you need to nominate somebody who has a no bullshit actual agenda for this place. Because things like turnout operations and data models are only ever supplemental. And I think
I guess I'm just asking, because this message is not getting across to Democratic leadership, what can be done at the grassroots level to mobilize?
Well, to me, I would organize for Bernie Sanders, and then I would on an electoral level, I'd organize for Bernie Sanders. But then on the other hand, I think there's without a doubt I bet there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people doing incredibly important work in Milwaukee that I don't like. I'd have to fly there and ask them. That's that's what we should do, right? Like, what are the best ways? Thanks for the call, man.
I would ask. Can I ask your listeners? I mean, if anyone out there is aware of organizations on the ground in Detroit, Philly, Milwaukee, please share that information. I mean, I've been thinking of things to do. I might, go door to door in Detroit and just registering people to vote. And I know the point of her piece is not so much that like voter suppression is the key issue. It's more lack of concrete policy proposals that will help people in these Rust Belt cities. But I'm just not seeing either the prioritization among Democratic leadership of this or much of a grassroots effort that at least I can find.
I think the grassroots effort is gonna though, I do think it's gonna come from something bigger and much more material than just something like voter registration. But please tweet all of the resources. Thank you so much, man. And I'll look into it more. It's a good question. Disco Stew, it's now obvious that the Barr memo is deliberately misleading attempt by the cover-up about the findings of the Russia investigation. Who could have seen that coming? Look forward to an apology from those on the left who jumped all over it and self-righteously finger wag. Well, okay. I think, again, we don't know. As in, like, we literally don't know. But, yeah, I mean, look, at least I don't even really think that's directed to me, but or maybe necessarily anybody here. I mean, look, obviously people who've definitively said things about the Mueller report are setting themselves up to be embarrassed. Just like other people who said definitive things about it going the other way set themselves up to be embarrassed. So at least for me, I think the bigger critique of how this was used in a way that distracted people from politics and got them into a very overworked up sort of fantasy life, in the broader civic and media critique, to me, the only way that wouldn't stand would be, in fact, as if there was like literal indictments. If Donald Trump was frog marched out of the White House, maybe that amount of attention and speculation would be justified. Now, conversely, yeah, definitely some people have clearly set themselves up. Like, I don't even understand, like, how could there not be massively embarrassing and problematic shit in a massive criminal probe about Donald Trump?
Totally clean.
Right. I mean, that would be sort of shocking.
Fully exonerated. I don't know
Well,
what
and we
you're
also
talking about.
right, and we also said from the beginning, this is something I know that we have called well on this show, going back very early, which is that even to the extent that there is fishy stuff, and there is definitely fishy stuff, this is a criminal story, not a Manchurian candidate story. So, but yeah. And I frankly, look, I think there's a big, I think somewhere in between saying it's World War III possible, which I totally don't agree with, and Sam comparing it to the OJ trial, which I also totally don't agree with, there is a massive middle ground. And I'm pretty comfortable on both shows, at least as far as I'm concerned, going back to not covering it.
I feel so
like the next thing is going to be the thing that we said before. We always said, wait till the report comes out. So now I'll do my new marker. I will wait till the full report is leaked, and then I'll have another opinion on it.
Yeah, it's weird that like people keep coming at us. I feel so undefensive about any of our output. I mean, I just don't think we. Yeah.
No, I don't think we. I mean, I might have made a few changes in the margins, and I've told Sam, but literally like in the margins.
It's still a fraction of the output that we've done over the last 2 years.
That's like the bottom line.
With this article that came out today on like people on the Mueller team being upset that their executive summaries didn't come out, and people saying like, well, see, people who are saying that nothing happened, something definitely did happen. You're kind of doing the same thing they did when the Barr letter came out. So just
wait
chill,
and see.
just relax. You got so much time. This is going to play out for so long.
You also have so many
baseball just started,
travesties. Like
postseasons are starting. Like, just relax.
Relax. There's and also, it's for God's sake, it's the fucking Trump administration. I mean, are you kidding me? Like, what do you? I just talked about them selling nuke technology to Saudi Arabia. And that's by the way, that's not like this person met with that person and that's there. They did that.
Well, in defense of that, I mean, it is a lot easier to pin your feelings and energy towards this one thing that feels more concrete, like to deal with something that is completely out of your control, like selling nuclear technology through private companies to the Saudis is tough.
I don't think him getting indicted about being a
sure.
secret Russian spy is in your control either.
All right.
What is in your control is going out and getting this motherfucker to lose 2020. I mean, and he needs to. Chomsky vocal fry forced to listen to MSNBC this morning, and coverage of Bernie is complete bullshit. When they do mention him, it's like, yes, I guess we should say he's the front runner for now, insinuating he didn't help Hillary enough in 2016. Will they ever bend the knee? I don't know. It'll be interesting.
It's very weird.
Well,
watching it.
Look, there is when you look at the Dana Milbank column, and unfortunately, MSNBC, MSNBC, we know is like not progressive, right? So, I mean, I have respect for Hayes. I know Sam does hits. I don't watch MSNBC. Is really the bottom line. I'm obviously, I have big problems with Rachel, Chris Matthews. I mean, come on. I mean, he's hilarious, but really. And then like Lawrence O'Donnell, I don't even know what Lawrence O'Donnell's current shtick is, right? So, and then there's a bunch of, someone like Stephanie Rule is just a pure Wall Street person and oligarch defender. And then there's, people like John Brennan on, for God's sake. And then there's Morning Joe. I mean, so the network is a disaster.
I mean, just don't let it get to you too much is my point. You got to see like that there is an alternative media space that is, really growing well and shows that people are, engaging with the stuff on the merits of it rather than just being fed whatever MSNBC is giving them. Today I saw on Twitter, they did a supercut cutting together Bernie's tax return avoidance with Trump's. And it's just like, okay, they obviously have a hit out on this guy. So you got to recognize that and then just move on.
Well, yeah, move on, but definitely, say it. Like, if one of your friends brings up MSNBC, yeah, it's not a legit MSNBC.
You are wasting your time if you're getting your news from television. I'm sorry.
Well, that's the big picture point, and the small picture point is this is not a credible source of coverage on Bernie Sanders. Period. Even down to like people who obviously have very weird personal vendettas against the guy, and like, you know. I think on this show, like we're, you know, obviously a lot more transparent, and I actually don't think there's anything on this show that is analogous to those sort of just clearly bizarre issues that people have with Bernie Sanders. And I'm not, you know, look, obviously I 100% support him. I don't buy, you know, to me, I'm sorry if you're on the left, it's just a clear choice, but like, I don't, you know, yeah, I don't understand. I mean, I think the closest, like when you read the Damon Milbank piece, it's an incredible fusion of course, it's totally disingenuous and misleading, but it's also very revealing. I mean, this is somebody, he soft pedals it, but he really is actually identifying America's oligarchy by name and saying, we cannot live with that kind of disparity, and people are suffering and dying, and we're going to reclaim resources. He's literally putting that on the same graph as the way Donald Trump talks about immigration. And not only is that just, you know, utterly morally confused and insane and sick, it shows how, I mean, there is a class of people in the media who are Howard Schultz level delusional. And a lot of them are on MSNBC. So, you know, and then others who aren't quite the same level have whatever weird issues developed from 2016.
Well, I mean, I'll just say, to name two examples, Malcolm Nance has lied on this show, so fuck Malcolm Nance. I mean, that's my editorial.
Right.
And also, I mean, I think that plus the Joy Reid thing about the hacked emails, like, I think it tells you what you need to know about that ethics of that network.
And what was funny is like we never said anything about, like, I even said at the time, like, you know what, whatever, let Joy be Joy. Like, I've been super easy, rightfully or wrongly, on these things, but like, it's also like, let's be very clear about exactly what kind of organization we're talking about here.
One that almost cut bait on Sam.
That did cut bait on Sam based off of a Michael Cernovich thing, and the only reason they restored him is purely because of public pressure and just how objectively humiliating it was. So, like, I hope we're not like getting Sam in trouble here, but like, you know, this is not Sam's feelings on MSNBC, but this is my feelings, Matt's feelings, and Brennan's feelings. And
it's bad. Watch YouTube.
It's bad. Watch YouTube. Read a book. Listen to a podcast.
Yeah, read books, folks.
Yeah, read books. And I mean, look, yeah, they're covered. I mean. Yeah, I mean, but honestly, in some ways, the hatred and the vendetta against him is so weird and so like over the top that like
even if they were,
it's self-negating to some extent.
I agree.
Because like again, it's like you can very easily go out and do your little like, is this really realistic? And he's grouchy and blah, 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 blah. But they come at him with so much animosity that, again, I'm telling you, amongst a broad set of normal people, and it's bared by polls, but also by talking to a lot of people anecdotally, including people who aren't sold on voting for him. Right. They don't get it. They're like, wait, like, you mean this nice old man who wants everybody to get health care? Like,
it really
what the fuck is wrong with you? Why do you hate him so much?
And if they had the effect to make that impression widely felt, then Trump wouldn't be president right now.
I mean, that's the other... Right. But yeah, they're not. Look, MSNBC, in general, watch TV. I mean, don't watch TV, read books, watch YouTube, get into things deeper. And when it comes to Bernie Sanders coverage, this is not, I mean, this is like reading it's like reading a Yankees fan page about the Red Sox. It's irrational. It's hateful. It's not legitimate coverage.
But you can contribute to the ratio online if you really feel the need
I would
to
do
something.
that. That would be a productive thing. That would be a productive thing. It was very funny to watch Dana Milbank whining after he put up this trash
The ratio
column.
proves his point that Bernie's like Trump.
You have to watch a news show on TV. Watch Jesus and Marrow.
Seriously.
Showtime, baby.
You're calling from a 478 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Is this me?
Yep, this is you.
Oh, wow. Great. I finally got to hear you guys. My name's Verbin. I'm calling from Macon, Georgia.
What's your name again?
Verbin. It's Verbin. It's a Native American name. You're not going to hear it a lot.
Varbin. Okay, got it. No, I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, got it. Okay, Varbin. Yeah. What's on your mind?
Verbin, like a verb and then in.
Verbin?
Like verb. It's what you do.
Varbin.
Yeah.
Verbin. No, he just. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
What's on your mind?
Right. Well, I guess I've kind of been thinking. Well, you kind of put it out there before. A lot of people just paint Bernie Sanders as just an old white man,
right?
Which seems pretty anti-Semitic when you really painted it out for me.
Definitely.
And that was yeah. But I think that we really got to start calling some of these things out whenever neoliberalism uses this as a way to sort of just, I guess, banner AOC, who pretty much matches him 99% on policies, but at the same time dismiss him completely. I mean, it really does come from a internal sense of anti-Semitism carried by the American public. I think we've got to call that out for what it is. It's sort of the social standard that we have with, like, systemic misogyny or systemic racism.
I think that that's true to some extent, and I think, and look, definitely, I think anytime you just say Bernie is just an old white man, I think that is a form of some objective anti-Semitism on some level, for sure. But the other two things that are going on are, one, there's two different things going on. So one, I think for some people who just have a much more, like, they follow politics the way they follow sports or entertainment, they just AOC hasn't offended them yet. AOC is, fits into their brand image more than Bernie does, so that works, and that's just a very kind of surface level, reading. The other thing, though, if I may, I mean,
real quick,
the other thing
I encounter it a lot because I'm one of the vice chairs of my local Democratic Party.
Right.
I mean, it really does have a lot to do with her existence as a minority.
Right.
It fits into our identity brand, which, because he doesn't fit into the identity brand, really does speak to an internal form of racism, even among the majority minority group of the Democratic Party. I mean, at least my local party here in Bibb County.
I'm not
Georgia.
sure I totally follow. I'm not sure. I'm not sure
Yeah.
I totally follow that, but I think the other part that's important is that the people in the center understand that there's a lot of momentum on the left. Where I was actually just talking about this in the interview this morning, and they're very adept at picking up different discourses and using them for their own ends. And I think right now AOC is somebody who they see opportunity to sort of enlist her in their political project. And Bernie has never been that. Bernie has gone from a guy that, people ridiculed and rolled their, like, while all of these other politicians were embracing deregulating Wall Street and attacking poor people and, never mentioned inequality, he was talking about it, and they rolled their eyes at him and said that Alan Greenspan was a genius, right? So he went from there, and then he went to being a national leader. And in each version, they either dismiss him or they hate him and they resent him. And I also think part of it is because, again, like, even though obviously he's a smart guy, and I guess he does actually have a degree from a prestigious school, he didn't do all these other things that, these people are trained to worship and obsess over. Like, you read any profile of like Buttigieg, it's like, oh my God, he was at McKinsey and he speaks all these languages, and it's like, cool, great, but like, so, honestly, so what? I'm not saying that, intelligence and ability. Actually, in other ways, AOC is a great counterpoint to this, right? Like, these classist, sexist dismissals of her, they go, oh, she's a bartender. It's like, actually, yeah, she did bartend. And you know what? She's clearly way more forensic, intelligent, and capable than most of the lawyers and other people with all these accreditations on that committee. So who fucking cares? Like, what is the actual plan? What's your capacity to really understand problems? But people get lost in these trinkets of the meritocracy, and I actually think that's another sort of problem that some of them have with Bernie, that he was basically like, you know, he's bumming around Vermont, being an activist, trying to figure things out, and then actually became a national leader by just being a good politician and having commitments. I don't think that that's appreciated. But yeah, I mean,
yeah. Well, you know, I think you make a lot of good points as to, you know, I mean, because it's not always racism or internalized anti-Semitism for everybody. I mean, I didn't mean to, you know, paint that, but I mean, you make a lot of good points in terms of that. You know, because AOC does have a very prestigious record before being a bartender too. I mean,
of course,
in terms of her academic record. So,
but look at it from my perspective. My favorite politician,
on paper merit.
My favorite politician in the world is obviously Lula, right? And he's a political prisoner right now. That guy he did not go to college. I don't even think he finished high school. He lost fingers as a metal worker. I have more admiration and respect for his ethics, strategic sense, and capacity than any other leader. Like, you know, who cares? You know, who cares? Yeah. If AOC never, yes, you're absolutely right. They're negating the fact that she went to PU and she's got good grades and so on, no doubt, and that should be pointed out to correct. But frankly, if AOC never went to college and bartended and then got elected to Congress, I would actually probably own my biases. I'd probably like her even more. Like, I don't care.
Yeah, I probably would too.
And conversely, that's you know, Buttigieg's credentials don't mean a damn thing to me. Nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'd just like to plug myself before I go, if that's all right.
Yeah, no problem.
You guys have kind of, you know, just to thank you for being not just a platform for the progressive movement, but what is the new, I guess I'd call the neo-socialist movement in America.
Yep.
You know, but you guys have kind of inspired me to run for local office. I'm going to run for mayor. On Friday, my website will be fully up. It'll be verbin2020.com. We're going to make a change here inside of what is a very blue dot inside of the sea of red that it has been Georgia. So, you know what? We're going to try and put a real socialist platform up in an area that it really can make a difference.
You should get Jeff from Georgia on your campaign team. He's not far away from Macon.
Make you campaign jingles.
Where's he from?
Do we know what?
I don't know.
I know he's from the Central Georgia area because it's 478 area code, but that could be anywhere from Houston County all the way up to like Milledgeville.
I'm not going to dox him on the show.
Those are very far places. Those are very far places.
Yeah,
like 2 hours.
Do you have like a Twitter or any type of social media presence that people can follow you on?
I'm going to be honest. I might be a millennial, but you know, I actually had to ask someone who does that more to do that for me. I've never.
All right, well, call back up when everything is launched and people can find it directly that way. Awesome, man. Good luck. That's awesome. You're calling from a 939 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Manny from Puerto Rico.
Hey, Manny, how you doing? What's on your mind?
I'm doing good. I'm a big fan of the show. To start. So anyways, I kind of had a question, but I wanted to like give a brief description so that you kind of understand where I'm coming from.
Okay.
So in Puerto Rico, there's two main political parties, the PNP, which is a right-wing majority party. They want statehood. Mm-hmm. And then the PPD, which is left-wing majority, and they want to remain with the current status that we have, which is basically colonialism. So in 2017, the PNP held an election of whether Puerto Ricans want a statehood or independence, and framed the current colonial status as a territory status, but that wasn't in the elections. And the statehood won, but as a protest, most of the electorate, which was the PPD, the other electorate, they didn't vote, and therefore, basically, half of the population of the electorate did not vote, and that counted as the referendum being not valid. So I guess my question is, what can statehood supporters and independence supporters do to end colonialism if half of the population in Puerto Rico wants to remain with the current status?
They want to remain. I don't understand. So what is their explanation? You're telling me the left-wing party in Puerto Rico wants to remain in the current situation?
It's different. It's not the same as Democrat and Republican.
No, I understand. I get it. I just want to know why.
But why don't they want a senator?
Yeah,
why
don't they want statehood or independence? Why do they want the current situation?
Sorry, there were two people talking at once, so I couldn't understand what's the question.
Why does one party want to maintain the status quo?
It's very, I would say, very superficial reasons, like to kind of have the best of both worlds, to kind of like remain an independent country and participate in the Olympics. Like very superficial, I swear. These are the arguments. They want to participate in the Olympics and remain with one sense of unity and country and pride, and to also have a little bit of the benefits that being part of the states provide us. So I would say that those are the main superficial reasons.
Well, I would say I have no idea. You know, I'm learning a lot more about Puerto Rico, and I really enjoyed spending time there. I would say, in my instincts, like how I view the world is, you know, Puerto Rico is a colony. It should become independent and so on. I would say in terms of practical politics right now, I think it's the very least should be the job of people who are like running for president and talking about being democratic leaders to 100% support statehood and full representation for Puerto Rico. And maybe if, you know, because again, as you know, it's obviously it's a colonized relationship. Maybe like if the politics here starts to change, it can open up new space in Puerto Rican politics. I mean, I know from reading War Against All Puerto Ricans, though, that like there was very serious independence movement in Puerto Rico, and they were mass murdered and terrorized by U.S. military, right? Like, and people were put in prison. Yeah. So I mean, I think like I'm sure there's that memory. But Manny, I'll think more about it. I appreciate the call, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, my gut is, and I've saw some skepticism or that stat about how a lot of Puerto Ricans don't necessarily want, you know, citizenship. But I mean, you want senators and a congressman.
I mean, I think maybe they're playing like off of that line of like, if you don't fully do it, it holds the possibility of independence, and I get that. Look, it's not our position to tell Puerto Ricans how they vote or what they want, but it is certainly our position to demand that candidates 100% support, well, I would say first and foremost, a choice for what Puerto Ricans want. But then secondly, you know, as long as Puerto Ricans are in the United States, they get senators, congressional people, and it's, you know, they need to, at the bare minimum, be a state. And by the way, that logic should apply obviously for D.C., but I would assume, you know, Guam and elsewhere. Situations I know less about. You're calling from a 706 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, how's it going?
I'm sorry. Will you tell me?
From Athens, Georgia.
Sorry, will you tell me that again? I missed the first part of it.
Oh, Patrick from Athens, Georgia.
Hey, Patrick. What's going on? What's on your mind?
Hey, not much. We just had where we're in the midst of having a abortion bill pass in Georgia. It's the Heartbeat 6-week, basically like banning abortions after 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of created, I mean, it's obviously going to be a travesty and a huge issue in our state, but I don't really see us being able to like combat it legislatively. And I've sort of wondered if there were alternative pathways to challenging sort of conservative Christianity in our country through maybe like organizing churches, like really, really super liberal-minded churches, and sort of like establishing bodily autonomy through discussing basically like, yeah, like kind of creating a freedom, like a religious movement based on bodily autonomy and challenging sort of the status quo in our country in that regard. And just kind of curious if you've ever run across movements like that or had any thoughts on it.
I know that there have definitely been nuns inside the Catholic Church who, I don't know if they've gone as far as fully being pro-choice, but they have been vigorously critical of the patriarchy around the church's teachings on those things, and I think have even advocated for providing like contraceptive services in Catholic hospitals. I mean, I don't know enough, but my instinct is totally with you. I mean, this is one of the reasons that I'm not, you know, well, without relitigating the whole atheism thing, I do think that there are places in the country where you have to, at the very least, contest religion and what it means to be religious. So I don't know more than that, but I like your instincts. And also, it's obviously an incredibly disturbing, misogynistic bill. And yeah, I don't know what you do to stop something like that happening in Georgia right now.
Yeah, I understand the sentiment of there needs to be like some sort of bridge or middle ground to move people from far-right conservative Christianity.
I don't think he's saying middle ground, though. I think he's saying like a left Christian perspective that's highly pro-choice, right?
I'm actually sort of suggesting a more controversial idea. I mean, I think on one level, there should be Christian and progressive Christians who have to do that. I'm actually not a Christian. I'm actually wondering if there is like even a more potentially interesting option than just organizing politically around the idea of churches and religion in terms of both labor and bodily autonomy.
Well, I would say certainly labor. Certainly labor. Thanks for the call. Certainly labor.
I don't know. Looking at some of the priests that worked at my high school on Facebook, the things, it's gotten worse.
It's gotten worse.
Yeah, like it's sad.
How do you see it's gotten worse?
Just like reading like QAnon shit and all that.
Priests are putting up QAnon shit? Jesus.
Best part of Facebook.
Sopranos, Father Phil gets into QAnon. It's a good
Calm.
Yeah, calm. It's this whole thing, and what he's doing is President Trump is revealing.
You gotta watch out for your husband. These guys, they got the families involved. I'm not saying anything.
And Carm's like, Father Phil says that Donald Trump's exposing all the crimes. You're calling from a 920 area code with the final call of the day. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, what's up? This is Mark from Milwaukee.
Hey, Mark, what's going on?
Not much. How are you fellas?
Good. Good to be talking with you, man.
Yeah, right on. So I know you guys touched on it, but I just kind of want to talk about the Wisconsin election for a minute. I know there was some talk yesterday about the turnout.
Right.
The turnout was actually like exceptionally high.
Right.
And even in our favor in terms of that Madison had a mayoral election.
Right.
So, I mean, that brought out way more people than we usually see for the Supreme Court.
So what happened?
Race in the state. I don't know, man. I think, you know, I mean, I side with Sam a little bit in terms of, you know, we got to put a little blame on ourselves. We do have some things going against us. The fact that, like, the only blue thing in the state other than, you know, Madison, Milwaukee is, like, Michigan. But, you know, like, we don't turn out. And it's been decades and decades of this going on. And it's like, you know, the Republicans saw the chessboard 20 years ago, and they've been playing it right. And we've been kind of sitting back and, you know, I don't know what the answer is, but I just wanted to call in and kind of like bring up the fact that like conservative talk radio in this state is super powerful. That was a big reason why Trump didn't win the Republican nomination initially, because the conservative talk radio, you know, pushed Ted Cruz so hard.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what the answer is, but there has to be something going on, you know, between even with you guys talking about MSNBC today and everything, like, yeah, the outrage is getting in the way of people going out and vote, you know, and like, I know there's a lot of folk I know that voted for Green Party for the presidential election didn't show up for this, so I don't know. I mean, I think it's just, you know, young folks like us, you know, making sure that people who we're talking to are not just posting their outrage on Facebook and making sure that they're paying attention to local elections.
Stop the collectivism. Thanks for the call, man. All right, we're going to read a few IMs, and then we're going to get out of here. Letter carrier, not only do we deliver Amazon package daily, including Sunday, we also deliver last mileage package for UPS, FedEx, parcels from Don's dad's favorite carrier, DHL. Max in Oakland, Stuart Vani, doing a good job labeling everything the right doesn't like as communism. I think one of the greatest triumphs the right has made in the last few decades is convincing everyone that the only important factor in determining one's political alignment is an attitude towards laissez-faire capitalism. Nothing else matters. If you're 100% for unregulated capitalism, you're on the right. If you are 99% or less in favor of unregulated capitalism, you're a communist. This is how J.R. Bolsonaro can get in front of a crowd and say the Nazis were leftists and have it resonate. The leftists need to push back against this simplistic, ahistorical view of politics. Yes, indeed. All right. I don't know. Does anybody have any advice on how to get out of jury duty?
Yes, say you work for the news media and that you have a conflict of interest.
Right.
And you've done a story on every case they try to put you on.
There you go. The final I am of the day. Brooks Brother member. Regulation leads to innovation, Dave, you dum-dum. To give you an example, I work in construction. There are plenty of specialized companies that have made billions and employed hundreds of thousands of people by creating products that specialize in solving code issues. I recently visited a unionized factory that only makes special hinges for windows that need to comply with new codes. Well, I'm not really I'm interested in ideas. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. Oh, we'll see you tomorrow. You thought I was going to do an idea riff for a while? Right. See you tomorrow. To get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101